Sisters and brothers, friends and guests, please rise for our national anthem.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the UFCW. The second UFCW Presidential Forum. Is the UFCW in the house? Yeah! That's right. Let me begin by recognizing Local 6 President Don Van Bank, Local 440 President Leo Connie, Local 663 President Matt Utek, Local 1149 President Roger Kale, 1189's President Jennifer Christensen, and Region 6 Vice President and Regional Director Tish Ramirez. I'd also like to acknowledge the members participating today from Locals 2, 21, 431, 440, 617, 663, Local 700, 1149, Local 1189, and all the RWDSU members from the RWDSU Council. We are here today, as I said earlier, on our second UFCW Presidential Forum. A few weeks ago, we heard from Senators Warren and Klobuchar. Today, we're going to hear from Vice President Joe Biden, Senators Kamala Harris and Michael Bennet, Governor Steve Bullock, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and via Skype, Senator Bernie Sanders. You know, this forum, as the one before, will provide our 1.3 million members with an incredible opportunity. An opportunity to hear from the leading presidential candidates about their vision, but most importantly about their policy ideas and how they plan to change the direction of America for the better. Most importantly, though, we'll hear how they plan to address the issues and the challenges that face our members and all hardworking men and women and what they care about the most. You know, make no mistake, the challenges that this nation faces are great. Regardless of the subject, there are no simple solutions to be found. And our nation's significant problems, quite honestly, will not be solved by cheap or empty rhetoric by any candidate. Serious challenges demand serious solutions and serious leaders. We must expect nothing less from the President of the United States. The fact is today, and you know it, too many workers are struggling to make ends meet. Tens of millions of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and they are one lost job away from financial ruin. The problems in healthcare endure, with workers facing increasing costs, poor coverage, high prescription drug costs, or employers who offer, quite honestly, unaffordable and unusable healthcare coverage. The economic and social threat posed by automation, quite honestly, is real. And it presents a clear and present danger to the future of work in this nation. Irresponsible corporate actors like Amazon and Walmart don't think twice about trying to take away the democratic rights of workers. And it goes without saying that we live in America today where we, the American people, are being tortured by political divisions, agendas, and dysfunctions. Well, do y'all think enough is enough? You know, America's leaders are here to serve the people, not the other way around. Our elected leaders are supposed to prioritize the issues that are important to us, not their own. And it's high time, now more than ever, that those leaders, those elected leaders, focus on building an America where hard work is rewarded, where one good job should be enough. Now, during today's forum, all these candidates are going to be asked a set of questions from our members. As with our last forum, members will ask those questions via video. Some will come from the people here in this audience. I'll also be asking questions based on what we heard directly from our members online. None of these candidates, not a single one, has seen any of these questions that we're going to ask. And I want to be clear, they're also not any of the same questions we asked last time. Our questions are going to be direct, and our members expect and want direct answers. The ultimate goal of this forum is to hear how each of these candidates are going to address the issues that our members care about the most. Not surprisingly, though, each one of these candidates has a unique perspective on how they're going to address these issues and lead this nation forward. And whether or not we agree or disagree with what they say, we need to listen closely. And we must respect the passion and the sincerity that they have in their convictions. However, it's our greatest responsibility as voters is to understand the following, that we should never blindly follow those that seek to govern over us. We're voters. We're not cheerleaders. This is not an American Idol show. We are electing the next president of the United States. And because if there's one thing that Democrats, Republicans, or independents should agree on, it's those that seek the highest office of this nation should, in fact, be held to the highest standards. And it's up to us, the American people, to hold them to these standards. So if there's one final request that I would make of all of you today, it's this. Expect more from our leaders. Demand it. Focus on the issues that matter to you and to your family. Remember the power that you and each one of us has to shape the destiny of our nation. And never, ever diminish the power of your vote. For our votes have changed America in the past, and it will change America again in the future. I am optimistic that during this UFCW presidential debate, that you and all of our 1.3 million members will hear directly from the type of candidates that will truly change America for the better, for all hardworking men and women. And so, with that being said, let's get this party started. I'd like to introduce to you our first candidate, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. As a former U.S. Naval Reserve officer, a Harvard graduate, a Rhodes Scholar, our next speaker's life has been defined by the call to serve. From the military to his current position as mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Mayor Pete has been reducing income inequality and strengthening organized labor as part of his two central pillars in his political campaign. I also want to let you know that when we had a strike in New England, Mayor Pete went to those workers. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome only one of two veterans in this entire presidential race, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mayor, they want you on that far chair.
All right. All right, I'll be brief. Good afternoon. How are you doing? Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for what you are doing to make sure that our economy works for workers. I'm really pleased to be with UFCW, and we've got fantastic UFCW membership in Indiana. I heard there might be at least one person from Local 700 here. Is that right? There we are. Thanks for hitting the road. Our campaign manager, Mike Schmuel, was working with UFCW before I convinced him to work with me full-time. Our Iowa State Director is a 7.5-year member of UFCW, and I have seen the organizing work that you are doing. That's exactly what we need more of in order to get our economy to work for all of us. I'm running for president because I think our country is running out of time. I'm looking at what is happening and what is about to happen to this country and believe that if we don't act now, not 4 years from now, not 10 years from now, but right now, we will not be able to recognize America. Right now, we're measuring the wrong things when it comes to our economy. They think a good economy is the stock market and the numbers on a page going up, and I'm asking how it can be a good economy if for so many Americans it is impossible to make a living even when you work full-time. That is wrong, and we got to put a stop to it, and part of that is supporting organized labor from the White House on down. I'm running because I believe that America has a better role in the world to play than what we see right now. As a veteran, it breaks my heart and makes my blood boil to see the United States, under the leadership of this president, abandoning allies who put their lives on the line in order to support us, and seeing indications of the beginning of a potential genocide and the return of ISIS terrorists, all because of a phone call and a tweet. It's a reminder of what's at stake in the presidency. And I'm somebody who comes at politics with the belief that what matters in the presidency is the lives that it affects around the world and right here at home. That our paychecks, our retirements, our marriages depend on the decisions that are made in those big white buildings in Washington, D.C. As a mayor, as a Midwesterner, I will never forget that, and that will be my North Star as your nominee and as your president. And I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have together. Thank you again for having me.
Before I ask the first question, as a reminder, we're going to ask everybody to keep answers within 2 minutes so that we can ask as many questions from the audience and the videos as possible. So the first question is that if you were to, I don't know if we need that or not.
Back up. All right.
If you were to wake up tomorrow and find yourself to be the President of the United States, if there was one thing that you could do to improve the lives of working men and women in this country, what would that be?
Well, we've got to increase unionization in this country. You know, they talk about, yeah, we can clap for that. And it's not just about unionization, it's about power. So they talk about the way our economy works now, right? You start the clock when I was born, and over the last 30, 40 years, what we've seen is the economy as numbers on a page has gone through the roof. But in terms of our ability to get ahead, it hasn't budged. If wages have gone up at all, it's nowhere close to the cost of health, the cost of retirement, the cost of education. And they talk about it like it's this cosmic force, like there's nothing we could have done to stop it. But it's actually the result of decisions made by politicians in Washington. If we make different decisions, workers are going to be empowered. What does that look like? It means changing who can organize, making sure that farm workers and domestic workers have organizing rights. It's why I stood up with gig workers, because I believe if you're doing a gig, you're a worker. And calling you a contractor doesn't change that basic fact that you're doing work. That means you ought to be protected as such. It's also how you can organize. We got to make sure, for example, that there is accountability when an employer gets in the way of a union election. See, right now it's on the books that you can't interfere, but the penalties don't have enough teeth in them to actually make a difference. So when I'm president, there will be multi-million-dollar penalties to actually compel companies to see to it that there is equal time on company time and to make sure that union elections are free and fair. We take steps like that, we're going to see a big change in the power of workers and in our ability to actually have this economy work for us instead of just look good for the president and his millionaire friends and look good as numbers on a page. One more thing. When I'm president, we're going to measure the performance of the economy not by the GDP alone, but by the income growth of the 90%. Because that's how we know the economy is actually working. In other words, we measure the success of our economy by what it means in your paycheck.
Okay. Let's turn our attention to the screen to hear from Mike Solberg, a member of Local 367.
I hear a lot of talk about how our economy is strong, yet I have many friends and family that are still struggling to get by. They see their wages stay the same, yet their employers are asking them to do more and more. What would you do to help my members earn a livable wage?
Fantastic question. Sometimes we're overcomplicating the debate over the economy. There's a lot of things that are changing, shifting in the 21st century, but the biggest problem in our economy is extremely simple. People are not being paid enough. It's that simple. And that goes for minimum wage workers, which is why we need a $15 floor on the minimum wage. And everybody working in America, I'm thinking of fast food workers, for example, who are standing up for their rights, ought to have access to $15 and a union. And it's making sure that we support bargaining and support organized labor for those who are doing better than minimum wage, but still not nearly enough to be able to get by. We live in the wealthiest country in the world, the biggest economy in the world. How is it possible that you can work full-time and live in poverty in this country? That is not because there's not enough to go around. It's because of politics. It's because of power. And with the right people in office, we can change all of that. So it starts with the minimum wage, but it's about a lot more than that.
Okay. All right, so we have an audience member, Melina Martinez, a member of Local 663, which is out of Minnesota. Melina?
Hello, my name is Melina Martinez. Is fair scheduling. As a working mom with 4 kids, it's not always easy to juggle work and family. It's been harder for some of my friends with unpredictable hours at their job. What will you do to put workers first, ensure all jobs have their fair scheduling?
I'm so glad you raised that because this is one of the issues that's making it difficult for folks to get by. It's not just how much you earn an hour. It's when your hours are going to come in. And when you don't get your schedule till the last minute, or when an employer can change them up on you with little or no notice, that makes it incredibly difficult to be able to support a family, like you said. We hear a lot about family values, right? Well, to me, making sure that your workplace supports your ability to raise a family, that's family values too. And it's why we will see to it with laws that require fair scheduling, as well as things like bringing back the overtime protections that the Obama administration put in that have now been removed, so that we can ensure that it's not just the hourly wage, but it's how you work that is protected. You deserve a predictable schedule so that you can make your work obligations compatible with the other things that matter in life. You shouldn't have to choose between being a reliable parent or a reliable volunteer in your community or your church or whatever else you would like to do with the time that you're not working because you can't get your employer to give you predictable hours.
Let's turn our attention to the screen to hear from Local 328 member out of Providence, Rhode Island, Michelle Sheehan.
Healthcare is a basic human right and should be available to everyone. If elected, what would your top 3 healthcare priorities be?
All right, great question. Maybe the defining issue of this campaign. So the first priority is to make sure everybody can get covered. Now, the way I would do it, we're calling it Medicare for all who want it. And the point is, we're going to take a version of Medicare and we're going to put it up to where everybody can get in on it. But the difference between me and some of the others is I'm not going to require you to get on it because there are some folks, including a lot of folks in organized labor, who have negotiated really good health care plans and they like the private plans that they've got. Now, a lot of folks don't like their private plans. They're underinsured, their insurance companies jerking them around. That's exactly why we need the public alternative that I call Medicare for all who want it. And by the way, this is why the insurance companies are fighting me, because they don't want to have the competition. But I believe that if we get everybody that option, then everybody gets the coverage that works for them. It's just that I trust you to make the decision. So if you come over to the Medicare plan that we're going to create, you will be guaranteed that the premium's never more than 8.5% of your income, and you will have quality, affordable coverage. But if you've got a plan that you already like, that's fine. I'm not pushing Medicare for all whether you want it or not. I want Medicare for all who want it, and I trust you to make the decision that's going to make the most sense for you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we know that prescription drugs are out of control even for people who do have health insurance. And so we got to make sure we're doing something about the costs. I'm going to put in an out-of-pocket cap on prescription drug costs. But one way my plan is different is mine's not a yearly out-of-pocket cap, it's monthly. Because a lot of us are facing our expenses and getting our income on a basis that you don't want to have to watch the months, month by month, to hope that it clocks in just in time for the yearly cap to hit. So we're going to make it a monthly cap, $250 maximum for out-of-pocket expenses, no matter what kind of coverage you're getting. The third thing in healthcare that is not getting talked about nearly enough, in my opinion, is mental health and substance use. How many folks here would say that you or somebody in your workplace or somebody in your family that you care about has faced some kind of substantial mental health or addiction issue? Okay, that's just about all of us. So it's not being talked about, but it's impacting all of our families in different ways. And it's why I am demanding that we treat mental health just as seriously as we treat physical health. That goes all the way from the schools, where we got to get teachers to have mental health first aid training, to providers, where we got to train more psychologists for working with kids and communities, to insurance companies, where we're going to require that anybody providing insurance actually insures equal coverage for mental health care, the same as you would for physical. And then culturally, you can expect a president who makes it okay to talk about these things, because it should be as normal and as acceptable to talk about a mental health issue that you're facing as it is to talk about getting a knee surgery or any other kind of physical challenge too.
Thank you. The consulting company organization, McKinsey, has estimated that because of automation and AI, we could see unemployment levels as high as 47%. And it's going to come at such a rapid rate. The normal retraining discussion that takes place really isn't going to be available to most people because of the speed in which we see it. What do you think you could do as the President of the United States that would in fact soften the blow or soften the landing for what we do have at least being projected going forward as far as automation and AI?
Well, the first thing I think we got to do is make sure that it is as rewarding for employers to invest in people as it is to invest in things like equipment and land. Right now, there is way much more of a return and an incentive to make those kind of physical investments than it is to invest in employees. But it's going to become more and more important because of that speeding up of the training curve that you were talking about, to make sure that we are getting those kinds of investments. Now, a lot of things are going to change in the workplace, but some things aren't. As a matter of fact, some things that labor is especially good at cultivating are going to become more important. Because if you just think about the parts of a job that are going to be most likely to change because of technology, they're often the parts of the job that are not as human. Maybe you can speed up a production line somewhere or have a machine do part of that. But you can't have a machine look a customer in the eye. You can't have a machine train a new employee. The things that you can't automate are dealing with other people, dealing with the unexpected, dealing with social and emotional issues that come up in the workplace, dealing with customers, problem solving. These are things that are important at every level of the economic ladder. And they're often the distinguishing feature that makes union employers more competitive. And so we need to make sure that as we build up funding for things like apprenticeships, as we build up support for labor, that we're also investing in the kind of human capital for things that are actually only going to become more important in the workplace, in a world where some of the parts of our jobs that didn't require as much of us are automated away. And those jobs can grow if we set up the kind of economy that is determined to engage people with everything that they bring. And that's so often the edge that workers have when they are empowered to bargain, to negotiate, and to invest, to reinvest in the development of the human capital for the future.
Well, given, as a follow-up question, given the fact that if that in fact takes place, if there's that much unemployment, there is going to be an attack on our infrastructure, our school systems, our parks, everything else that normally are the taxes that the American worker pays is going to be at risk. Would you consider taxing AI in a way that workers were taxed if they replace workers?
Yeah, and I think if we have the right structure for corporate taxes, it'll have that effect. See, right now, the tax structure really incentivizes you to move in that direction. But what we've got to look at is the ways in which we reward returns to capital versus returns to labor. And it is way easier to hide the value of what's going on with the machines.
We're
than it
very
is.
aware of that.
But we got to open this up, right? Because the other reality is, right now, there is more than enough productivity in this economy. In other words, American workers are producing more than enough wealth in this country that we could absolutely fund the things that we need by way of public infrastructure, resources, schools, health, the things that make us competitive for the next generation. And by the way, if you look at a place like China, they're making those kinds of investments. If we want to stay ahead in this coming century, we've got to be investing in our domestic competitiveness. If we ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share, if we make sure that corporations, even if they're moving around their profits on paper, still have to pay, then we can absolutely fund the most important things for the next generation, and we should.
Okay. Okay. Look, I think there's been a lot of candidates for the office of president that have said that things that they don't like about our existing president. If there was one thing that you could say that he's done right, what would that be? I said no high hard ones, but I just did.
All right. You know what? I'll give you two, sort of.
Okay.
I'll give you two halves. Maybe they add up to one. One is that there's been a push on criminal justice reform. Now, I don't think it's gone nearly far enough, but the First Step Act did a lot of good. We cannot go on as the most incarcerated country in the world. If incarceration made us safer, we'd be the safest country in the world, and we're not. And there's a lot of racial justice issues at stake in criminal justice reform, too. So to the extent that both parties are starting to come around on that, and in some ways this president has done some things in the right direction there, then I think we ought to acknowledge that we need more where that came from. The other thing I would say is I strongly disagree with some of the measures that this president has taken with respect to this trade war he's created, because it's undermined manufacturing, it's hurting farmers, especially here in the Midwest. It's hurting us. I don't think enough folks realize how many goods that we count on just as consumers are getting more expensive because of the tariffs. So I don't agree with that. But what I will say is China's a real challenge, and we got to step up and deal with this. China has a completely different attitude on how to run an economy and how to run a country than we do. They are using technology for the perfection of dictatorship. And it's going to be a major issue. So I wouldn't deal with that by just poking him in the eye like the president is and seeing what will happen, because what happens is they poke back and it comes down on the backs of American farmers and workers. But what I will say is we've got to recognize that we've got a major competitor. We've got to make sure that our national security is protected, especially when it comes to the way the electronics industry is getting very entangled with China. And we've got to work out a strategic framework where we can stay a step ahead. Otherwise, I think we really are going to have challenges. And I think not everybody in my party is as concerned about the China challenge as I am. So maybe those two together sort of add up to one. But I got to tell you, I don't have much use for this president.
We're kind of on a tight schedule today, and I'd like to invite you to give some final remarks to the group. I want to tell you, again, I can't express enough our thanks as a union for your engagement and your involvement in New England. We had 31,000 members that were fighting for their lives, and you stepped up, and we thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I was really proud to stand up with you. I was proud to do it then. I was proud to be on the line with GM workers recently in Nevada, and we're going to look for every opportunity to stand up with American workers because what's going on right now just isn't right. And there's a lot of frustration and anger that actually this president's tapping into, even though he's making the problem worse. And if we're not speaking to that, then we're going to continue to be divided as a country. One of the things that keeps going through my mind is that a president like the one we got now should never have been able to get within cheating distance of the Oval Office in the first place. And the fact that he did, I think, reflects a lot of unfinished business, a lot of problems in this country that we haven't taken care of, that we've been falling short at taking care of for as long as I've been alive. And so the next president's going to have to do a lot more than just win. I'm trying to picture the first day after Donald Trump is not president anymore. After all, one way or the other, right, this presidency is coming to an end. And I'm picturing what it's going to be like in America that first day. And obviously, there's a sense of relief, I think, if you see the world that I do, that kind of flavor of chaos and corruption and division will be over. But what's America really going to be like? What's Thanksgiving going to be like? Yeah, we're going to be even more torn up over politics than we are now, even more divided. And all these problems didn't take a break during the Trump administration. Basic problems around wages and income and labor protection and climate and gun violence, those are still going to be there. So what we're going to need is a president, and this is what I'm running to be, who can undertake the bold actions that it's going to take to get us health care, to get us better wages, to get us reform, and able to bring us together as a country too. You can't get one without the other. We're going to have to step up and solve these problems and guide the country into a sense where we're one country again. And the biggest thing that's motivating me to do this is a sense of urgency about the future that we're moving into. I got a lot of kids who come up to me at the events that we do. And the questions they're asking are personal questions. A 12-year-old in Orlando asking me what we're going to do about health care, not because she's a precocious policy buff who's just really interested in health insurance at the age of 12, but because she has diabetes and she's worried about what will happen to her if she can't get health care through her parents anymore like she does today. She's worried about this at the age of 12, when she should be concentrating on 5th grade, which has its own rewards and challenges. I had a 14-year-old write into me about gun violence. She said she hugs her family goodbye and tells them she loves them every day when she goes to school because she's afraid that she might not come home and she wants to make sure their last memory of her is a good one. This is something that's on the mind of a 14-year-old. And the only good answer I have for these kids is you shouldn't be worrying about any of this. We're supposed to fix this. And by we, I don't just mean people in office. I mean anybody old enough to vote is supposed to fix this and deal with this so you don't have to. And we've got an opportunity to do that. We've got an opportunity where we could look back at 2020 and, as rough as things got by 2019, say that 2020 was when things got better. So come 2030, I want to be able to run into those kids again and say, I'm sorry I got that bad, but look at what we did next. Look at the steps that we took to make sure that everybody, regardless of where they come or what language they speak or how they worship or who they love, that everybody belongs in this country. Look at what we did starting in 2020 to deliver racial justice and make sure that your race has no bearing on your health or your wealth or your life expectancy or your relationship with law enforcement in this country. Look at what we did to make sure that gun violence was extremely rare. Look at what we did to make sure that we got an economy where when the rising tide rises, it really does lift all boats like they say it does. And then we could be really proud of ourselves. And instead of feeling so torn up over where our country is, we could look back at 2020 and say, this is when we made things get better. And I'm meeting so many people who are motivated by the future. It's not, when Melina spoke up with her question, she was talking about her kids. And the fast food workers that we've been marching with, who are trying to organize, every time I meet them, they don't talk about what they wish they could spend an extra few bucks an hour on. They talk about their kids and their grandkids that they're often raising, trying to take care of, dealing with medical conditions. They don't have the income to do it. People are ready to make sure that the world is better for their kids. And I am too. And Lord willing, in a few decades, I will be able to look back when I reach the current age of the president and in my retirement look back at 2020 and say that this is when we came together to make sure that this economy actually works for us. That's what I think the presidency is for. It's why I'm running for president, and it's why I'm hoping to earn your support.
You made a point there at the end, and the point was that, you know, there are a lot of people out there that are working hard, and we've seen it time and time again. People working part-time, they say, the company says they're going to provide health insurance, but they can't afford it. Mm-hmm. They can't afford to pay for it. If you think, what's somebody at $15 an hour at 20 hours, what can they actually afford when the benefits, the company's charging them $400 for it? Right. They just can't afford it. Right. So let me say this. Thank you so much for being here. We certainly appreciate everything that you've been doing to talk about the issues that we have in our country, and we wish you all the luck.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing you all on the trail. Thank you very much.
We there? Our next candidate really doesn't need an introduction. It's Vice President Joe Biden. As a former senator and then Vice President of the United States, there are very few elected leaders who've shown the level of dedication and commitment to labor and working people's issues as much as Joe Biden has. Over 6 Senate terms, he fought to protect the vulnerable, to lift up the working and middle class. His commitment and passion to changing this country began long before his service with President Obama, and it continues to this very day. You know, Vice President Biden called the locals in New England before he jumped into the race. And he said, what can we do? What can I do to support those 31,000 Stop and Shop members? Well, he did a lot. He showed up, and in a big way. So let's give a special UFCW welcome to the former Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. Thank you so much.
Come on, man. Congratulations on the win. You're going to win a lot more.
Well, we will if we've got people like you.
I guarantee you.
Go get them, Tiger.
Well, thank you. Hey, folks, how are you? I'm a friend of Pete Buttigieg. By the way, there's a really decent guy. I turned on the television this morning, and he was defending me and my family against these outrageous lying ads of the President of the United States of America. That's a good man. That's a good man. Look, Mark, it's great to be with you again. When I went up, I did want to know what I could do to help. You were campaigning in a picket line against Stop and Shop, and their parent company made over $1 billion, and they're trying to tell you that you don't deserve. They're going to cut back health care. They're going to do a whole lot of things. Folks, look, I saw hundreds of people, and there was a platform they had. I didn't know we were going to be standing and speaking in that big parking lot, that shopping center. I looked out, and there were, 1,000 people. They said there were hundreds and hundreds of people out there. But the interesting thing to me was a significant portion weren't members of a union. They were ordinary Americans who figured out, without you, they're getting screwed. Without unions, they're in trouble. And that's not a joke. It finally, the real trouble they figured out was not all that's been fed to you, fed about unions and me and others for the last 35 years. Remember, you're the problem. You're the reason. They've declared war on labor's house starting 25 years ago, constantly, the business community. But now people are figuring it out. They're figuring out that it has nothing to do with their, all you do is help them. The fact is that business has gotten greedier and greedier the more impact they've had on pulling down unions, the more impact they've had on keeping unions in a tough spot. And so, the fact of the matter is, let me give you an example. They cheated hourly workers, not union folks now, hourly workers who aren't members of unions. They cheated them out of overtime pay, and even union members by reclassifying you as management. You know how much that cost you all and workers for the last year? $1.2 billion. $1.2 billion should be in the pockets of hardworking people, went into the pockets of the CEOs who are making over 400 times the average of what their employees make in that firm. And it's just wrong. All they're doing is about suppressing wages. Now they make people sign non-competes. Non-union members, if they work for Jimmy John's, they sign a non-compete. They won't go across town to try to get 10 cents more working at McDonald's or another fast food chain. It's all about suppressing wages. It's all about your dignity and fairness. And folks, the fact of the matter is that wealthy and powerful conservatives, in fact, don't think we're somehow as good as they are. I was raised in my early years in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and then in Claymont, Delaware, a little steel town. And the fact of the matter is, most of the people I was raised with were like me. Their mother or father never went to college. They found themselves in a position where they were mostly ethnic. They were Irish, Italian, Polish, African American, etc. And they're basically looked down on. It was like somehow these folks with power and money could deny us our dignity. My dad used to have an expression. He said, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. And the one thing we've learned is the only way you can get dignity from these folks is be powerful as they are. And the only way that happens is with unions, the only ones who can take it on. That's a fact. That is a fact. Folks, the philosopher Kant said the definition of dignity is people should never be treated as a means to an end, but an end in themselves. Today we're being treated as a means to an end, to make profit for the stockholders, make profit for them, not as people. And folks, it's getting worse. That's why the union movement started in the first place, to demand dignity, a fair shot, an even chance. Whenever given an even chance, we've never, ever, ever, ever let the country down. Just an even chance. And folks, you can't get that dignity from these folks unless you have power. And there's no way that can be done other than demonstrate the power of the unions. Last point I'll make to you is, look, Wall Street did not build America. They did not build the middle class. Unions, not like, but unions built the middle class. It's the only reason why anybody out there has a 40-hour week. Only reason why anybody has overtime pay. Only reason why there's safety standards, so on and so forth. And look what's happened here. I just learned from my staff in Iowa. I didn't know this. They passed legislation saying that if you're injured in a meatpacking plant or anywhere else with a shoulder industry, you now get paid 68% less in workman's comp. What the hell's the matter with these guys? It's about, no, I really mean it. Think about it. Think about it. How bad is that? Where is our common decency? And folks, the rest of the country is looking to you. They're looking to you because they know that you can't maintain our dignity without equal power to confront the abuses that are being put in place, which I guess we're going to get a chance to talk about. But here's the deal, guys. If I'm elected president, I promise you that you will have no stronger friend, no more reliable partner, no better advocate in the White House than me. And I know you got questions coming, so why don't I hush up and sit down, as my mother would say, and take your questions. But God love you. Thanks for what you do. We all owe you big.
Mr. Vice President, we're asking everybody to keep answers within 2 minutes on each question.
I'm not sure I can do that. No, I'm only joking. I will.
And I say that very respectfully.
No, I will. I promise.
But, you know, you mentioned something right there at the end. You talked about companies and the amount of power that they have. And they have, in fact, violated workers' rights over the years if they were trying to exercise their democratic right to have a union. Would you consider any sanctions against any corporation that was found guilty of violating the rights of workers during organizing campaigns or any sort of programs that they were doing to advance their interests?
By the way, I not only would do something, I guarantee you I will do something. And let me tell you, beyond passing the PRO Act, which everybody talks about, which is real, you realize these folks spend about $1 billion a year, $1 billion a year to stop organizing, corporate America, $1 billion a year to make sure it makes it harder for you to organize. Here's what I think has to happen. Instead of just having civil fines that are paid by the corporation, the CEOs don't pay that fine, the individuals don't pay that fine, their stockholders pay the fine, and then they raise prices to consumers. We should hold the individuals accountable. We should hold the CEOs accountable. We should hold the people who are, in fact, engaging in the practice of making it hard for you to be able to organize, threatening you, all the things that are done to make it more difficult to organize. Secondly, any corporation that works with the federal government has a contract, and we have billions of dollars of the contract, that engages in that activity will not get federal contracts. I will move to make sure that comes to an end. No, really.
That's big.
No, it is big. Barack and I tried that. You have to be able to prove it, and we think we can prove it. But and by the way, the National Labor Relations Board, we're going to have union representation on the board. We're going to have anti-union people on the board. They're supposed to wear striped shirts. They're supposed to be the referees. Well, they haven't been the referees. And we should have enforceable sanctions on these guys. I could go in more detail about it, but my time's up. No, I got 20.
You got 24 seconds.
I got 24 seconds left. The fact is that we're in a situation where right now it's about $50,000 fine. It should be a heck of a lot more depending on the grievancy, but depending on the extent of the offense. And that's what the NLRB is not doing. They are not going in and saying, here's the deal, this is what you did, and you owe that fine now. And if it is really egregious, I believe we should think about criminal penalties for the actions of CEOs and executives who, in fact, engage in this. No, I really mean it. I promise you, nothing will get their attention like one person getting a criminal penalty for egregious violations of your rights.
Well, they'll certainly send us to jail if we violate their rights. But
You're darn
anyway.
right.
I'd like to turn your attention to the screen to hear from Gloria Hall. She's a member of 951 out of Michigan.
When I get sick or one of my coworkers gets sick, we need to be able to take time off to rest and get better. But some employers make it hard or impossible to take time off when you're sick. This hurts workers, our family, our customers, and businesses. Would you support paid sick leave policy to help workers and their families stay healthy?
Absolutely, positively. I think there should be a minimum of 12 weeks paid leave to take care of family members, almost for whatever reason. number one. Number two, I also think we should be in a position where if in fact you are needing to be able to take care of a family member or a child, for example, I was lucky. I had insurance, but when my son was diagnosed with a terminal disease, well, they tell you, and just like all the folks coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, I keep a little thing in my schedule here. Every single day, I have a little box put down in how many killed in Afghanistan and Iraq, how many wounded, not generally, how many fallen angels. It's not roughly 6,900, 6,996. And what we find is, in order for those folks who are wounded, the 52,933, the best care comes from family members being able to be with them. And so you should be able to have, I'm going to insist on a $5,000 tax credit to allow you to be home and have sick leave after your 12 weeks is up to stay home to take care of that person. $5,000 tax credit means if your taxes at the end of the year are $5,000, you owe no tax. If the taxes are $20,000, you owe only $15,000, because it is just the decent, honorable thing to do to help families who are in need. I hope that answers your question.
It did. We have a question from an audience member, Thomas Lynn, member of Local 1149.
Hey, Thomas.
Hi. My name is Thomas, my Local 1149. As a pastor and first-time voter, I know how important it is for the voice of working families to be heard. But many states are making it harder to vote. What will you do to strengthen voting rights for all Americans?
Number one, we're going to immediately recognize Dreamers as being Americans, period. Number one. Number two, we're going to provide a path to citizenship for 11 million undocumented, most of whom have overstayed visas, by the way. That's most. Number three, we're not going to lock any families. We're not going to separate families. We're not going to put any kids in cages. We are not going to be engaged in building more fences. We can protect our borders without doing any of that. We have a right to protect our border. We can do all that without in fact, doing what this president is doing and attempts to do. Did you hear, by the way, he thought, we later learned that apparently in the spring he was on The View, allegedly reported that he wanted to build a moat. Could he build a moat along the Mexican border where you fill with alligators and snakes? And allegedly, according to the press report, he was asked whether or not his folks could shoot people coming across the border, and they said no. And he said, well, you can just shoot them in the leg? Can you do that? This man is not a good man, number one. Number two, if in fact you, as a union member, report an inequity or a violation of the law while you're there, and even if you weren't documented, no action can be taken against you. That's important, because what's happened is we have forced people into hiding, and they do not report everything from domestic abuse to watching a crime and/or what happens within the corporate culture that is a violation of the law. There's many more things, but they tell me my time's up.
Well, you have about 24 seconds, and I want to do a follow-up.
Okay,
but
sure, follow-up.
There is voter suppression going on in this country.
Sure there is.
And we ultimately want to see everybody have a right to vote that's got a right to vote. Thomas had said this was his first election that he's going to vote in because, he's a new American citizen. Do you have any ideas about any ways that you might be able to improve what's taking place in some of these states as far as voter suppression?
Yes, I'm going to have an attorney general, and she or he will be in a position where we will take on over 30 states that have made it more difficult for people to show up and vote. We should have same-day registration. We should have the ability that when you go to get an automobile license, you're automatically registered. When you move to get any identification, you're automatically registered to vote. It should be automatic. There shouldn't be anything missed between the cup and the lip. When that happens, what happens is that it increases voter turnout significantly. There should not be these phony requirements to have identification cards that in fact make it very difficult for some people to physically get there to get them, particularly the elderly, et cetera. So I would have a attorney general who I promise you will be as aggressive as Eric Holder was and our attorney generals, and even more in taking on the states and taking them to court for the violations of the Voting Rights Act. And folks, we have to restore the Voting Rights Act. That's what I did when I was a United States Senator as chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I was able to extend the Voting Rights Act for 25 years. Every year every time it has to be reinstituted. But then along came a bad decision by the court, which I won't bore you with, but I would try to change and amend the decision by the court that doesn't require the court to any longer to go and check on states that have engaged in voter fraud, engaged in denying the vote, from having to get what they call a pre-clearance. Up to the time this legislation passed about 10 years ago, what happened with the court ruled 10 years ago, what happened was, if you came from a state where you had suppressed the vote, you had to submit your voting records, your voting requirements before any vote could take place to be signed off. It required pre-clearance. You got that? Yes. Now, I would move to reestablish pre-clearance, because the very states that are the ones that had engaged in Jim Crow efforts to deny the right to vote are the very states doing it again. They're doing it again. And so, but I, in the meantime, would have very strong enforcement from my Attorney General.
Thank you, sir. Our democracy depends on it.
It really does. And by the way, speaking of democracy depending on it, it's a crime to ask a foreign power to intervene in our elections.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
I'd like for you to turn your attention to the screens to hear from a Local 1 member, Renata Pokransky.
I know I speak for many workers and families here today when I say we are sick of rising health care premiums and skyrocketing prescription costs. How would you make health care more affordable for workers and their families?
Two ways. Number one, I would set up, in terms of the cost of health care to begin with, a circumstance I build on the Obama Act, the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. I put in a public option. I reduced the amount of money required to buy in, so you can have a gold plan. No one will ever have to pay more than $1,000 deductible, no matter what insurance they have. You'll never be in a position, if you don't have the money, you're automatically enrolled in the Medicare-like option, and you're enrolled for free, no cost. Secondly, I set up a proposal, and this will get done. Set up a proposal where, in fact, that any new drug being asked to get a patent will have to go before a board of people, of experts at NIH, not from NIH, at NIH, and the price will be set based upon a return on investment. The utility company can't charge you anything they want to charge you. And the irony is, we're now in a position where if you find a life-saving drug, they justify they can charge you anything in the world for it. It should be the opposite. It should be, what did you have to spend to get it done, and what's a significant return on your investment? Once that price is set, it cannot be raised again unless some fundamental change takes place in what the product is, unless beyond the cost of medical inflation. So you can't have these deals where an EpiPen goes from $1 to $1,000, or it goes from, you can't do that. You will not be able to do that. And so there's, I forget, you asked me another part of that question. That's how we keep down drug costs. That's how we keep down health care costs. And everybody will be covered, period. And you can keep your private plan, unlike Medicare for All. 1.6 million people have negotiated a plan with their employers. They like their plan. They don't want to give it up. You should have the choice to keep it.
Thank you. We want to hear from an audience member, Mark Lawrenson from Local 6. He's also an international vice president. Mark.
I like vice presidents. Good to see you again, Mark.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Vice President. I'm Mark Lawrenson. I am a member of Local 6, and many of the other members in this room work in the meat packing industry, regulated by the USDA. And somebody now over at the USDA has made a boneheaded decision to lift line speeds and caps in these facilities. Currently, in a hog slaughtering operation, we currently kill 1,106 head an hour. They want to increase that. In poultry, it's the same story, and now they're going to try to move this into beef. My question to you is, with the removal of inspectors and the lifting of line speeds, our meat is now going to be less safe for our consumers, and our workers are going to be more at risk. What can you do for us to make sure that these risks don't happen to the consumers and to our members?
A whole hell of a lot. Whole hell of a lot. First of all, restore the provisions we had in the Obama-Biden administration. Number one, I come from the largest poultry producing area in the world, and the Delmarva Peninsula. So I'm fully aware of hanging chickens and how you deal with that. But let's talk about pork and beef. I think every single person who's talking about how we speed up the line and reduce the number of inspectors ought to be required to go into a plant and watch. No. I'm deadly earnest, man. You all know in that industry, you're 2.4 times more likely to receive an injury than in any other manufacturing operation that exists in the United States of America. Number one. So number two, I'm going to significantly increase the number of OSHA inspectors. The idea that a company should be able to provide inspectors, which in some cases they do, is absolutely outrageous. And secondly, the idea that we're in a position where you, in fact, are going to speed the line up, increasing injuries as a probable outcome is absolutely greed. It's just simple greed. They value your health less than they value the health of the slaughtered pig or the slaughtered cow. And so, I'm serious, think about it. So there's a lot we can do. We set up a lot of limitations on being able to speed up the line, putting more OSHA inspectors on the floor, in the plant, round the clock, paid for by the federal government, enforced by the federal government, and not speed up the line. There is, in fact, and by the way, it not only diminishes the prospect that you're not going to get injured, it diminishes the prospect that the product coming out the other end is going to be healthy, that is going to not be infected. There's not going to have some serious problem that cause the public, when they purchase it, to be in trouble. And so am my time up? I guess not. I guess it is. I'm sorry.
Mr.
But
Vice
anyway,
President,
I promise you,
what after that?
as we Catholics say, the first time I went into a slaughterhouse in Delaware as a 29-year-old candidate for the Senate, I had an epiphany, as they say. It was an amazing thing to see how damn hard you work, how difficult it is. And now you have the Iowa State Legislature passing a law saying if you have a shoulder injury, it's no longer going to be calculated, the loss, the way it was before, and then reduced by 68, I'm told, or over 60%, what you're owed. This is outrageous.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you talked about foreign powers inserting themselves in elections. With so many issues that our members have to focus on today, whether or not it's health care or whether or not it's retirement security or being able to make ends meet or getting their kids to college, why should our members care about impeachment? And under the circumstances, given the composition of the Senate, knowing kind of what the outcome's going to be, should we go forward with impeachment?
Look, I may be the last guy to publicly call for impeachment, but I'm the only reason there is impeachment going on. Because this president I've written extensively about how this president, our democracy is literally at stake. It's not a joke. This is the most corrupt administration in modern American history. Maybe ever, but in modern American history. And the fact of the matter is that whether or not the Senate will impeach, whether or not it impeach, there's no option but to deal with this. Asking 3 foreign governments to interfere directly in our elections to try to, have you ever heard of a sitting president, spending going to the special interest groups, the NRA, the insurance industry, the gun manufacturers, to spend millions and millions of dollars to run ads against a potential opponent in a Democratic primary? I think the boy knows that I'll beat him like a drum if I get the nomination. And here's the deal. And you go to 3 foreign governments, not just all about me, 3 foreign governments, and ask them to come in and interfere in the sovereignty, the sacredness of the American electoral process? Come on. Come on. This is outrageous. How, if in fact the House doesn't move and let the facts fall where they may, then what is the next unethical president if we elect another one? What's that say they can do? What's that say? What's going to happen? They have to know there's consequences. And look, I served in the Senate a long time. I was there when Nixon was impeached. I was there when the House voted to impeach Clinton. I was there and I watched it. Guess what? An awful lot of people have what we call epiphanies. You know, like on the road to Damascus, they have another view. When all of a sudden now you have, if the numbers are correct, and I don't count the polls as being particularly accurate, always accurate, more than half the American people now think he should be impeached. Impeachment to them means they think he should be kicked out of office. The reason why it should be a last resort, because it does have an incredibly negative impact on the state of affairs in a country. I wish it didn't get there, but it's gotten so far now. If you don't move on it, then what do we say to the rest of the world about who we are? What do you say about opening the gates and say, come on in, get involved in our elections? What do you do? And folks, look, I predict to you that the thing that's going to change people's minds, if the House moves forward, which I'm expecting they will, if they make their case clearly as why they're moving toward impeaching, that's an indictment, it's not a conviction. You impeach, meaning you get an indictment. The American public are going to listen closely. And what's going to change Republican minds in the United States Congress is when their constituents start changing their mind. And you're seeing it start to happen. More Republican voters, independent voters, are saying, whoa, 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 I didn't know this. I wish we didn't have to get there. I really do. But I think there's no choice at this point. None whatsoever. Not just because I'm the target. He's not hurting me. Everybody, every single solitary mainstream investigator and media outlet around the world has said there's nothing there relating to me or my son. Every single one. It's a flat lie. But I tell you what's going to affect. It's going to affect you. If he stays in office, he's going to be able to continue to do the things that are being done. And so their job is to determine whether to impeach. My job is just to flat out beat him.
Mr. Vice President, the floor is yours for your closing remarks.
Well, I'll be very brief. Look, folks, I meant what I said from the bottom of my heart, my word. You're the only reason why so many people I grew up with and so many people that I know and the folks I went to school with, why, in fact, we have any sense of our own dignity. Because you're the only thing that stands between the barbarians at the gate and getting through the gate. And we've been going through hell because you've been getting pummeled, organized labor, for the past 25 years. Only 6% of private employers are unionized. That's going to change. It's got to change. It's got to change. And I promise you, not because of this electoral process, go look at my record. Go look at what I've said and done my whole career. My whole career since I got elected as a 29-year-old kid. I am proud to be known as a senator and an elected official who's always been with labor, and labor's always been with me. I'm proud of it. And when I got started, my state was just coming out of being a right-to-work state. So I didn't come from a state that was significantly pro-union. But guess what? You are the answer for a lot of people who are not members of unions. You're the answer of a lot of ordinary people busting their neck that determine the future of this country. People shouldn't be able to just tell you on the spur of the moment, you got to work 2 more days, you got to work overtime, you got to do this, you got to do that. You have a right to control the basic elements of the workplace. And it doesn't happen without you. And I think you, be very blunt with you, you're going to get mad at me, this is not a good political thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think you underestimate the importance that you supply for so many people. I really do. I don't think you fully grasp how consequential what you're doing is in industries that have nothing to do with any ones you cover. And you cover a myriad of industries. But I tell you, we need you badly. And the public's ready to be there. And the Fair Labor Standards Act, when it was passed, you know what it said? It said not only are you able to form a union, it said we're supposed to encourage unions. Encourage, not a joke. And you know why? Because they figured out in the 30s, when you do well, everybody does well. Not a joke. When American laborers get paid a decent, honorable wage, minimum $15 an hour, protections of all the things we talk about that you fought for, when that happens, the wealthy do very well, the middle class gets stronger, and the poor have a way up. It's that basic. It increases the purchasing power. We're a consumer-driven economy. The more you make, the more you spend. It's not like you have enough money to go out, no matter how much you make, and invest in some, not scheme, and make some investment. You need it to send your kid to school. You need to try to figure out how to pay off a debt. You need it to be able to do things that fundamentally require you to go out and spend virtually all you make. But we should be protecting your pension as well. That's why I'm going to set up in the Department of Treasury a portal where, in fact, you can borrow money to maintain the pension. In fact, they'll have to borrow the money to make sure your pensions are paid. Because no one should go through what my dad did. Work like hell, and all of a sudden the company decide that they go under and there's no pension. It's all gone. To be middle class is to be able to own your own home and not have to rent it if you don't want to. I know that's probably me trying to get off the stage.
I think that's just somebody doing their phone. But
and to make sure that you're able to send your kid into a park where you know they're going to come home safely. Send them to a local public school that's good enough. If they do well, they can go on either to trade school or to community college or to college, whatever they're capable of. And being able to take your geriatric mom home when your dad passes away. But most importantly, hope your children never, ever have to take care of you. Never a burden. Just a little breathing room. You know it, but most people don't. There's not much breathing room out there. You have the majority of the middle class thinking their children will never reach the status that they have reached. They'll never have the same standard of living. When that happens, America's in trouble. Our stability is based on a growing middle class. That's why we remain socially stable, politically stable, and economically stable. Put it real simply, we badly need you. And if I'm your president, I promise you, you'll never have had a better ally in the White House. Thank you. I mean it.
you know, brothers and sisters, one of my favorite sayings is this. Martin Luther King said, men are not judged in times of comfort and convenience, but rather in times of challenge and controversy. And over the course of your life, you've certainly seen both. I want to wish you the best, and I hope that we'll be seeing you very soon.
God
Mr.
love you.
Vice President.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
The Vice President of the United States. Well, that was pretty interesting. Come on. Our next candidate is Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado. Now in his third term, Senator Bennet believes that no doubt, as many of us do, that the time to restore economic promise for America, he's fought for workers and their families. He stood strong in his belief that we must reform our immigration system. And he passionately believes that this election, the time has come to restore the integrity back to the White House. Let's give Senator Bennet a proper UFCW welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you want to give remarks here?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It means so much to me that you included me in this. It was great to see the Vice President on his way off the stage. And I want to just thank you for all of your work through good times and through tough times. If I had to summarize the last 10 years of my town halls in Colorado and now in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, it's actually very straightforward. It's people coming there saying, Michael, we're killing ourselves, but we can't afford some combination of housing, health care, early childhood education, and higher education. And for the families that don't come to my town halls because they're working 2 and 3 jobs, who are the people I used to work for when I was superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, school districts that's got 95,000 children, and most of kids living in poverty, mostly kids of color. What those parents who I know well would say is we are killing ourselves, and no matter what we do, we can't get our kids out of poverty. And that is an anecdotal reflection of the last 50 years of an economy that's worked only for the people at the very top. Only the people in the top 10%. Everybody else has essentially not gotten a pay raise or fallen behind because as their wages have been flat, the costs of things like housing, health care, higher education, early childhood education, the building blocks to getting into a middle-class life and staying there have just gotten more expensive. And what has Washington done over that period of time to respond to that? Exactly the opposite of what it should have done. We've cut taxes for the wealthiest people in this country, $5 trillion since 2001. We borrowed $5 trillion from the Chinese to cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans and make the income inequality worse in this country. This president, for the first time in American history, is the first president to take health insurance away from millions of Americans. We have weakened organized labor, made it harder for you to organize. We've made it harder for people to vote, and we failed to invest in the infrastructure in this country, which is a deeply unfair thing for us to do, not only to people that could do those jobs now, but to the next generation of Americans who are going to inherit a country that hasn't taken care of the assets and infrastructure that our parents had the decency to build for us, much less allow us to build the infrastructure that our kids are going to need. So we're going to have a good conversation today, but to summarize it, I think what we should do to solve this is basically the opposite of what we've been doing for the last 20 years in this country, and we need to start investing again here in America. I've got plans to reduce childhood poverty in this country by 40%, to change the way we educate people so it actually liberates people from their economic circumstances, to ensure that when we have an economy, it grows for everybody, not just the people at the very top. And a strong, organized labor movement is a key to all of that. So thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to answering whatever questions you have. Thank you.
I'm going to skip the 2-minute part, but
I hope I didn't go over.
Yeah, you didn't. Don't worry about that.
Okay, good.
My first question to you would be is that why do you believe that you have the right experience to be the President of the United States?
So I think that's a great question everybody should be asking, because this is the hardest job that there is. I've spent a lifetime outside of politics before I even got into politics, and it was out. I was in business, and I was the school superintendent in Denver, and that last experience in particular is different than what any other candidate has in this race. I always judge what we're doing in Washington through the eyes of the kids that I used to work for in the Denver public schools and their families. And in my view, the last 10 years, basically from their vantage point, has been a failure. And I don't want to repeat that again, because if we do, we'll be the last generation, the first generation to leave less opportunity, not more, to the people coming after us. And then in the Senate, I've been there for 10 years, which is enough time to have gotten some things done and to almost gotten some really important things done, like the Gang of Eight bill on immigration and rewriting the Elementary and Secondary School Act and that kind of stuff. But I've seen the corruption up close, and I don't think that somebody coming from outside is going to be able to wrestle it down in the same way that somebody who understands it is going to be able to wrestle it down. The bottom line is this: our exercise in self-government has been immobilized for the decade that I have been in the Senate by this so-called Freedom Caucus that's taken their crazy ideology and put it in the center of American politics, which has made it impossible for us to make investments in workers and make investments in infrastructure, to do what we need to do on health care and climate and all the other issues we care about. Those people aren't going to go away. They have to be beaten. And in my view, the only way they are going to be beaten is for us to win in purple states, to win the presidency, and also win a majority in the Senate.
Okay. If you turn your attention to the screen, we're going to hear from Marcos Hernan, a member of 1428 out of California.
For years, I have seen companies chip away at our rights as workers. Today, it's harder to get a raise, and many families I know are struggling just to get by. How will you stand up for unions and protect the good paid jobs our families need?
It's such a great question. I mean, when you look at the percentage of union membership in the private sector today compared to what it was when this economy really was working for everybody, it's a massive change. And there are all kinds of ways in which the federal government and state and local governments have made it harder for people to join unions, not easier for them to do that. And we should be doing the opposite of that. Obviously, we should have an NLRB that actually supports workers rather than one that's ripping them down. We should have a Secretary of Labor and a Justice Department that's making sure that we're defending important laws and changing those laws, passing bills like the PRO Act to actually extend the rights of workers to organize to make it easier is something that we should do as well. But we need to mobilize people in the country politically. I mean, part of the issue that we've got is only 50% of the people in this country are voting. We need everybody to vote. And if everybody would vote, we could have a pro-union agenda and an agenda that's aligned to what the needs are of working people all over the country.
Okay. I'd like to call from an audience member, Wendy Felton, from Local 1189 out of Minnesota.
Good afternoon. I work at our local neighborhood grocery store, and I also serve on our local school board of education. I'm proud to be active in our community. As someone who is diabetic, I'm concerned about the rising price of insulin. What would you do to help make healthcare more affordable for workers like me and ensure that we have access to the prescriptions and medications that we need?
Thank you so much for the question. First of all, I think this whole campaign has been much too much about coverage of health insurance and not about costs. What I hear in my town halls, I do hear about coverage, but what I mostly hear is about the cost and people having to make decisions about buying food and buying prescription drugs, or seniors not filling prescriptions that they have, people not able to fill prescriptions for their kids. I used to see that all the time when I was working in the Denver Public Schools. And by the way, thank you so much for being on your local school board. It's a labor of love, I know, and important. My plan calls for finishing the job with the Affordable Care Act, covering everybody in 3 years with a public option, not disturbing the plans that labor already has for health care, and demanding that requiring that the federal government negotiate drug prices for everybody in America. We haven't done that, and we've allowed basically the pharmaceutical companies to set their prices, and that's got to change. And so that would be my proposal for reducing drug costs, which you asked about. We also need to reduce the cost of all health care as well. And today in America, it is impossible for you to find out what anything actually costs. You can sometimes find out what you've been charged for it, sometimes, but by the time you finish fighting with your insurance company, you can't even remember what that is anymore. And so we need to create a lot more transparency so people know what everything costs in our healthcare system, so we can create an opportunity for you to comparison shop and make the best decision for yourself and for your family. And that could drive costs down a lot. Thank you.
Okay. You know, you talked about the Freedom Caucus. This organization has focused in on redistricting around the country because basically I think that some of the districts have been gerrymandered, and it does not, it doesn't lend to a true democracy where both sides of that district are heard. I know that in my district, I wrote a letter to my congressman, and I didn't get a response back.
Exactly.
Now it wasn't a terrible letter. I was just asking questions about what they intended on doing about health care and pricing, and I assume they assume that I was on the wrong side of the political aisle. I was just really asking the question. So, what do you think that we can do going forward in the future, whether or not it's a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, to ensure that we have fair districting so that we have a true democracy that takes place in this country?
That's the key. In my view, you are either for the democracy or you're not for the democracy. If you're, one of the 2 times that I've been to the White House since Donald Trump was president, he took the time that I was there and some other senators were there to talk about how he would have won New Hampshire, except he said they sent busloads of thousands of illegal voters from certain parts of Massachusetts into New Hampshire to cause him to lose the presidency. That's the way this guy's thinking about this kind of stuff, and they've erected all kinds of barriers. He put a commission together, the president did, to study voter fraud, and I kept writing him letters saying there is no voter fraud that you have to investigate, and 2,000 people from Colorado have taken their names off the voter rolls because they don't want to send their information to Washington, D.C., and they finally capitulated, and they stopped. You may remember that was there, but is now gone. And so if you're for being on the side of the democracy and you're for the idea that, look, people may not agree with each other. In fact, part of being in a democracy is not agreeing with each other, but everybody ought to have a fair chance and a fair shot to persuade each other, and the rules are stacked against us, in my view, right now. Gerrymandering, which you guys have been working on, is a huge part of it, and that would be a huge part of changing the Freedom Caucus, because those guys are completely unresponsive to anybody except the right wing of their own party, because that's the only risk they face in an election, because there will never be a general election where they can be beaten. And I have had the bill in the Senate to end political gerrymandering so that politicians don't get to pick their voters. Voters are the ones that get to pick the politicians. The second thing, I think, if I were president, I would lead an effort in every single state, all 50 states, to pass a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, to get the money out of our politics and put people back into our politics. And for me, that's not a throwaway. That's about how do you reorganize people in this democracy. The last time we had income inequality like the income inequality we have, we had to reform the democracy the way it worked. We fought to get women the right to vote. We ended the appointment of senators by state legislatures and replaced it with direct election of the American people. We are at a moment now where we should have a national organizing movement around these questions. Gerrymandering, ending Citizens United. I've had a bill for 10 years that says if you have the privilege of being a member of Congress in the House and Senate, you should accept a lifetime ban on ever becoming a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., because half the people that leave and don't retire become lobbyists in Washington, D.C. And at the same time we're pursuing those reforms, we need to make it easier for people to vote. Same-day voter registration, automatic registration when people are 18 years old, 3 weeks for people to put their ballots in, mail-in ballots. The list of things is long that we could be doing to make sure that people have the right to vote, not to create an unfair advantage, exactly the opposite, to make sure that we have a fair opportunity to be able to raise the American people's voices against the special interests in Washington, D.C. I'll finish this by saying this. You're going to hear lots of promises, over now until Election Day. You should be asking people, how are you going to get any of it done? Because if we don't reform the system, if we don't do the kind of work you guys are already doing on gerrymandering, it's going to be very hard for us to fix all the rest of the stuff that needs to be fixed.
One more question, and then we're going to go into your final remarks. What do you say to our members who worry about losing their health care coverage under a Medicare for All system?
Look, I've been since the very beginning, since we passed the Affordable Care Act, I have been the guy who's advocated for a public option. And that's not some lousy compromise with Bernie Sanders. As Bernie says, I wrote the damn bill when it comes to Medicare for All. I wrote the damn bill on the public option. And I do not believe the American people are going to sign up for something that makes illegal private insurance in this country and starts to tax people that are making $25,000 a year to pay for it. $33 trillion of taxes is what Bernie's talking about. Those aren't Republican talking points. Those are his talking points. And that's 70% of what we will collect is the federal government in revenue in the next 10 years. The American people aren't going to go for it, and I don't think most members of the labor movement are going to go for it. Let's get to universal coverage in 3 years with a public option, auto-enroll everybody who's eligible in Medicaid, auto-enroll every kid who's eligible in CHIP, which is the insurance program for poor kids, and in 3 years we'll be done. I don't want to fight a losing battle for the next 10 years over Medicare for All, when what we need to be doing is eliminating childhood poverty in this country and making work pay again in the United States of America. I don't want to fight that losing battle when we should be making sure that we're dealing with climate and that we got an education system that actually is lifting people up rather than reinforcing the income inequality that we have as a country. Just might change the tax code, the American Family Act that Sherrod Brown and I have proposed. That alone would reduce childhood poverty in 1 year by 40% in this country. It would end $2 a day poverty for children, and it costs 3% of what Medicare for All costs.
Senator, final remarks?
I would just say thank you very much for having me here. I know that I'm a long shot candidate in this race. I wouldn't have gotten in the race if I didn't think that I could win. I am the only candidate in this race that has won 2 national campaigns in a purple state. And I think that's critically important for us when we think about beating Donald Trump. Uniting the Democratic base is not enough. We have to do that. But we also have to win back some of the 9 million people that voted twice for Barack Obama and once for Donald Trump. And I think my plans on the tax code and the economy, my plans on education, my plans on health care and on climate are all ones that can allow us to unify the country and the reforms we talk about, unify the country and close over a broken Washington. I ran for president because I refuse to be part of the first generation of Americans to leave less opportunity, not more, to our kids and our grandkids. And I believe when Donald Trump ran for office saying, I alone can fix it, what he was saying was the most undemocratic and unpatriotic thing that any president could say, because you know what? It's not really about who's at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It's whether the voices of ordinary Americans all over this country are mobilized to overcome a broken D.C. That's why the labor movement's so important. That's why you're so important. And that's why you're going to be critical to us carrying this election in November, not just the presidency, but a majority in the Senate as well. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. The number 3 issue for our members is taxes. If people don't make a lot of money, they can't afford to pay a lot of taxes.
That's right.
And at this point in time, the way things are going in this country, these people are being taxed at a higher rate than folks that make a lot more money than they do.
And it is absolutely ridiculous. I know you saw that for the first time in American history, the 400 richest people are now getting taxed less then your members are getting taxed. My two bills with Sherrod Brown would turn that completely around.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
Thank you
Mr.
so
President.
much.
I appreciate it.
Mark.
Thank you.
Mark.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Senator. Well, our next candidate that y'all are going to hear from today is Governor Steve Bullock. You know, as someone that was elected in a state that was easily won by President Trump, Governor Steve Bullock knows a little bit about winning in so-called red states. As the former Attorney General of Montana, Governor Bullock took on the rich and powerful corporations, not because it was easy, because it was the right thing to do for workers. And whether or not it was the Supreme Court or opposing anti-union laws, he's fought to improve the lives of workers in the state of Montana. I want you to give a warm UFCW welcome to Governor Steve Bullock. Governor. Man after my own heart has got on blue jeans.
President, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being
really
here.
appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. It's great to be with you today. Tell you about a guy named Dave. Dave worked 20 years at the Billings landfill. Got passed over for a job just because he couldn't read so well, even though reading had nothing to do with the job that he was seeking. Halfway through an arbitration, we go out to lunch, and he goes, "Lawyer, if I could read so well, I'd be sitting where you are. But I put 2 kids through college working at this garbage dump, and I'm damn proud of the work that I've done." Look, you all actually walked the walk. Before I was elected governor, before I was elected attorney general, I was a union side labor lawyer. Worked on behalf of Teamsters, IBW, our public employee unions. I know the fights that you've had. As a private citizen, I actually worked to increase the minimum wage tied to inflation. When I was Attorney General, fought against nationally worker misclassification. And as governor, Montana is still a state where you can organize and collectively bargain for better wages, better working conditions. We're now at a point where when independent contractors and contract workers are twice as many employees as union members, and union membership's half of what it was in 1980. When Lindsey Graham literally says, we got to get these tax cuts through to make our donors happy. At the same time, every one of you in this audience paid more in taxes last year than Amazon, Chevron, 60 Fortune 500 companies. It's pretty darn clear that Washington, D.C., our economy, and the political system isn't working for you. Now, Iowans, every 4 years, you have all of us, we come, we talk to you. We tell you how important you are. We say that we'll walk and change what's done. We talk about our 37-point plans, and then we leave come February. You're stuck far too often with inaction in Washington, D.C. when it comes to actually labor rights. You're stuck with inaction, actually rolling back efforts in Iowa. This election is both about the White House and the State House. I don't know about you, but for somebody that first started to do union work well over a decade ago, 15 years ago, I'm tired of playing defense. I'm tired of recognizing that 60% of Americans haven't had a pay increase in real terms in 40 years. I'm tired of thinking about when I was growing up in the early 70s, 90% of 30-year-olds were doing better than their parents were. Today, it's only half. It's time that we stop playing defense and get back on offense, because we need a Washington, D.C. that actually works for working people. I'm so excited to get to spend some time with you talking about exactly how we get there. Thank you for having me today, but more important, thanks for all the work you do as fine UFCW members.
Well, he certainly came dressed properly. And I really wish I could.
You're looking good today.
Well, I really wish I could be in the blue jeans too. In fact, I've been a little bit irritated at Adamola about it, but it is what it is. He's got me up here in a suit.
Sorry, Adam, I would have dressed up to make you look a little bit better with the president.
You know, we got about 2 minutes to answer each question. You know, what I'd like to do is start out by asking you, the first question, which would be, is that what is your vision if you were elected the President of the United States? What would your vision be?
Yeah, I mean, my vision would be to make sure that the economy in Washington, D.C. starts working again for working people. I said at the start, when you think about 60% of Americans haven't had an actual pay increase in about 40 years in real terms. Like, we're working harder and we're making less. So folks are getting left behind, and then they look to D.C. and it's captured by money in politics, which has been the fight of my career. It's captured by dark money. So to make people actually believe, whether you're urban or rural, that Washington, D.C. can work for them. Look, I was the only person in this field, actually the only Democrat in the country to win a statewide race in a state where Trump won. He took Montana by 20 points in 2016. I won by 4. 25 to 30% of my voters voted for Donald Trump. And in many respects, I'm a single issue voter, and that's making sure that Donald Trump's not reelected. But if we're going to do that, we actually have to be able to win back places that we lost. The path to victory doesn't just go through the urban areas.
That's right.
And the coasts. We've got to be able to be competitive all over. This is about winning places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. This is like a third of the counties in Iowa voted Obama, Trump. And when I say we all leave after this, you're dealing with a legislature that's stripping away workers' rights, stripping away education funding, not helping farmers and ranchers. So I think that the greater vision is ultimately getting everything to work again, bridging some, because whoever wins, we got deep divides in this country. But we need to both bridge those divides and make everybody think that they would have a fair shot at a better life. That's always been the American dream.
Well, it is. It is the American dream. You know, you talk about farmers. You know, my father was a farmer.
Yeah.
And given what's going on, at least as it relates to this trade war, you know, a lot of these people are suffering. And really didn't think that was going to happen. But, you know, I would like to see, you know, some real thoughtful trade discussions that would, in fact, support the members in this room and many of the farmers that are trying to earn a living. If you would, please turn your attention to the screen. Carl Sepulveda, a local member from upstate New York, would like to ask you a question.
We hear a lot in the news about whether Social Security will take care of today's workers when they're ready to retire. What would you do to strengthen our Social Security system?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Look, I still remember, and how many of you remember the first time you actually got that paycheck and some money was taken out of it? And you're like, where's that money going, right? Social Security is not only a contract that we make from the beginning, but it's also a demonstration of how we treat one another. And we've gotten in this situation where Social Security Trust Fund, the money that you pay in, certainly the money that my kids pay in, if you look at it, it's not solvent. Everything that was expected may not get there if we don't take some immediate action. So we got to get the trust fund back to solvency. And the best way to do that is to be lifting the cap. So the wealthy folks, bigger wage earners, actually have to continue to pay in. And what you could do as you take those steps along the way is also those at the lower income could actually get more money. You know, it's one of these where it ain't rocket science. We know what we have to do, but that's one of those where it's just amazing how, and this is my perspective from somebody that's not in Washington, D.C., a place where talking about things has kind of become the substitute of doing it. Like, one of the most solemn obligations we would have is to protect Social Security, and we can't get any movement on it. They haven't passed a budget on time in 20 years. As a governor, if I didn't get a budget done and actually balanced in 1 year, I'd be kicked out. So I think that we've got to take that perspective of, first of all, directly to Carl's question, we can make sure that Social Security isn't just something that you pay into, but you get it back out by lifting the cap, and we got to bring folks together to get that done.
Good. I want to call on Gunther Anderson from 617. Gunther?
Thank you, Governor. My family has access to the health care they need, and my children have an opportunity to pursue a higher education because of my union. But companies like Amazon and Walmart are aggressively making it difficult for working men and women to become union members. So I'm wondering what you could do to protect workers' rights and ensure everyone has the opportunity to join a union.
Yeah, no, thanks, Gunther. And that's, as I point out, literally there are twice as many contract workers in this country as union members today. There's been a wholesale assault on unions since the early 80s, even before at times. And we shouldn't be playing defense, because at the same time that I say 60% of workers haven't had a pay increase in real terms in 40 years, it's the same time that the unions have been declining and declining. Even if you're not a union member, the impacts of a union impact everybody going in the middle class. So I think that we do need somebody in D.C. that's more than just will talk the talk, that has walked the walk. I know what it's like to sit at a bargaining table representing union members. The Employee Free Choice Act, we have to get there. We have to get to sectoral bargaining. We got to have the National Labor Relations Board ought to be actually working for you all. It doesn't anymore. And the thought of privatization, because in some ways, as they're talking about privatizing your inspectors, we're privatizing prisons, we're privatizing so many of the essential federal government functions, we've got to reverse that. I will, if I end up the nominee and then the president, I'm going to be somebody that's actually recognizes the value of organized and collective bargaining for safer working conditions, for better wages, but also for everybody that's even not in a union, because when the union movement's strong, that's how everybody comes up.
Governor, what would you say would be your top 3 health care priorities if you were elected president?
So I think that, look, we've got to get to the point, and in Montana, even with a 2/3 Republican legislature, right, we expanded health care for 100,000 people through Medicaid expansion. We actually got mental health and physical health parity. But my priority is we are a country where everybody ought to have affordable, accessible, quality care. I'd get there by having a public option, Medicare buy-in. It is insane to me that we pay more for prescription drugs than any country in the world, and Costco can negotiate drug prices. It's against the law for the federal government to do it. So negotiating prescription drug prices, Indian surprise medical billing, and ending out-of-network charges. The biggest step that we took since Medicare was the Affordable Care Act, and it's not perfect. But Republicans have tried 70 times to strip that away. I don't think Democrats should. I think we can build on it and get to the point without taking away employer-sponsored health care or union-negotiated health care for 165 million folks.
Okay, good. What would you say to those union workers who supported Trump 4 years ago, and why should they vote for you if you're the nominee?
Yeah, and when I was running in 2016, not with union leadership, but often in the union halls, I'd hear folks say, you know what, Bullock will have your back, but we just don't know if that Democratic Party has ours. And you can see why there was frustration when lives aren't getting better. But for those union members that supported Trump, I'd say he said that he'd have your back, but has he? Income inequality is greater today than ever before. You're paying more in taxes than all those companies. He said he'd drain the swamp. It's swampier than ever before. At the end of the day, this is about more than organized and collective bargaining, which is so important, because he's probably the most anti-worker president in the last 80 years. But this is also about when you wake up each day and saying, who are you working for? Are you working for folks so that they can actually climb that ladder and live that American dream, right? I was raised in a single-parent household, paycheck to paycheck. Only knew there was a governor's house in town because I delivered newspapers to it as a kid. But still, I had that chance from delivering newspapers to the governor's house to living in it and raising our 3 kids in it. And that's what everybody ought to have the dream to do. I'd say to those rural union members, and we can't cede those areas. Like, look, time and time again, he hasn't been helping farmers. He hasn't been helping union members. I've refused to cede the votes of rural Americans if folks that actually work the land, feed the
world pass a plate on a Sunday are forever going to be wedded to this guy with orange hair and a gold toilet. He doesn't understand our challenges. And find somebody that actually understands the work that you do, both as a union and as a middle-class family trying to raise a family. I wake up each day and say, well, I've got a 17, 15, and 13-year-old children. And if nothing else, I got to try to make this country better for them. And I think that's the perspective all of us take as parents, and that's what we ought to be taking as politicians. And any union member that says, oh, Donald Trump's been real good for me, take a look at it. Lack of health care, that's up. Farm bankruptcies are up. Hate crimes are up. Your salaries haven't been going up because of what he's done. It's actually grown slower. Unemployment has gone up because of what he's done. So he hasn't had union members back at any step of the way.
Thank you. I'd like to give you an opportunity to have some final remarks to the group. I know that the comments that you've made certainly have spoken to me today, and probably many of our members, but if you would like to give us a summary, I'd really appreciate it.
No, sounds great. And thank you for taking this so seriously as well. Look, as the only governor in this race left, as somebody off of the coasts, as somebody that turns around and says, how can we make sure not only that your union can be strong, but your communities can be strong? When you think of 2/3 of the counties in this country lost businesses in the last decade, and you shouldn't have to leave your place of worship or your school or your community just to make a decent living. We've got to change what's happened in Washington, D.C. But first of all, this is a single-issue election for me, and that's beating Donald Trump. So I noted I was the only Democrat in the field to actually win a state where Trump won. 25 to 30% of my voters voted for Donald Trump, but I've also been able to, even with a 2/3 Republican legislature, been able to get meaningful things done like health care for people, like kicking dark money out of our elections, by making our colleges fourth most affordable in the country, but also recognizing not everybody's going to go to college, figuring out that path along the way. We need to be able to win back places we lost. If we run up 2 million more votes in California, it ain't going to make a difference.
That's right.
And this really is about both the White House and the State House. You and Iowa have dealt with what happens when you lose these seats. So I'd encourage you to go to stevebullock.com, take a look. We still have about 120 days before Iowans first express their preferences. I've learned about Iowa Nice. You take it seriously. You say, well, you're somewhere on my list. I'd ask you to put me near the top of the list, because not only could I beat Donald Trump, but I could bridge some of these divides to get this economy in Washington, D.C. working for you. Thanks so much for having me today. Sure. Appreciate you having me.
Governor, thank you for coming.
No, thank you. Thanks for
You're a common sense guy, and we certainly appreciate the work that you've been doing.
Well, thank you.
And if there's something that we can do for you, please call us.
All right, maybe an endorsement, a few other things like that. Yeah, you know, he asked. He said.
Well, I know that's what I said. Let me tell you how our process works.
Yeah.
We have been interviewing our members, doing focus groups, talking to our local leadership, and basically trying to focus on the issues. We think issues will determine this election. We don't think it's the politicians or the politics. If, in fact, you're on the right side of the issues that make a difference to our members, I think that you'll ultimately rise to the top. And they're going to make the determination about whether or not we endorse anybody or not.
Well, I appreciate that. And, yeah, somebody who's fought for both the union values and union members, even long before I got into this whole thing called politics, take a look at where I am on the issues, and I think you'll be happy.
Well, I just learned something today, that you were a labor lawyer.
Yeah, it was, well, and the stories like I tell of Dave, those were the stories my kids grew up with. Yeah, so it was Teamsters all throughout Montana, IBW, Nikolai in Montana's UFCW, never ended up representing UFCW. And it was some of the most important work I ever did.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks again.
Governor Bullock.
Thanks.
Yep.
This way. Thanks again.
Take care. Oh, no. You go right ahead, Governor. Not a problem. Thank you so much. Our next candidate is Senator Kamala Harris. That's right. Even before entering federal office, Senator Harris has been a champion of working people and union members. You know, from her days as a San Francisco district attorney, and believe me, we've got a question for her, to the California Attorney General, now U.S. Senator, Senator Harris has stood up for what she believes and fought for justice and the rights of others. And as president, she's vowed to be an advocate for the people and to create a nation where the economy works for all people. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends, let us welcome Senator Harris.
How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good?
Go get them.
I will.
They're
Every
warmed
day.
up for you.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. Thank you, Mark. It is great to be in the House of Labor. I'm looking forward to getting into our conversation, but let me just tell you, getting right to it, I believe that in 2020, justice is on the ballot. I believe justice is on the ballot. When the families that own Walmart make more in 60 seconds than the average American family makes in a year, justice is on the ballot. Justice is on the ballot when they pass a tax bill benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America, but yet working families in America are paying more in taxes every year than the 400 richest families in America. Justice is on the ballot when in 99% of the counties in these United States, if you're a minimum wage worker, working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment. Justice is on the ballot when you look at the fact that teachers in America who are educating our children in public schools are working 2 and 3 jobs and leaving their profession because they cannot afford to pay their bills. Justice is on the ballot when you have a president of the United States walking around talking about the economy is great, but when you ask him, how are you measuring the greatness of this economy? He talks about the stock market. Well, that's fine if you own stocks. 72% of the stocks in the United States are owned by the top 10% of Americans. You ask, well, how else are you measuring this economy to say it's doing so great? And they talk about the jobless numbers. Well, UFCW, you and I know, yeah, people are working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. And in the America we believe in, you shouldn't have to work more than 1 job to have a roof over your head and put food on the table. Justice is on the ballot when line speed is faster than safe speed. Justice is on the ballot when minimum wage in America means a poverty wage. Justice is on the ballot when 40% of workers in America are losing their jobs to automation. Justice is on the ballot in 2020. And you have, for the history of this union, fought for justice, and we have stood together. As Mark said, back from the days I was district attorney of San Francisco, where I stood with labor and stood on picket lines with labor, to when I was Attorney General of California, leading the 2nd largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice, and elected as the first woman and the first person of color. And we stood together when those big grocery stores were trying to merge. We stood together at a local, a state, and an international level when UFCW was fighting to make sure that we would retain your pensions, your benefits, when all they were concerned about was turning a profit. And justice, again, is on the ballot. And so I am proud to stand with you. I am proud to stand with you and will, as president, to ban right-to-work laws, to stand with you, to require card check, to stand with you, to raise the national minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, to stand with you, to say in the face of automation, every worker who must transition will get an $8,000 tax credit in order to be able to develop the skills to transition into the jobs that may be created, and that $8,000 tax credit will include all that will be necessary to transition, including covering child care costs and transportation. I will stand with you as we fight for paid family leave, and my intention for paid family leave is that it will be 6 months of paid family leave, because I recognize that there are so many working families who are doing double duty, trying to take care of their youngest children and trying to take care of their parents. And if we say that we are a nation that values family, then let's put justice first and recognize what is required to raise a family in America for a working person. Justice is on the ballot. And my entire career, from the first time that I walked into a courtroom as the district attorney of San Francisco, I walked in saying, Kamala Harris for the people. And that was for all the people. And it was understanding that in our system of justice, nobody should be made to fight alone. And so I stand before you, UFCW, to say to you, when I am president, you will never fight alone. Thank you.
Senator Harris, we're going to do about 2 minutes per question.
Okay.
As far as the answer is concerned. You did stand with us during those merger discussions in California. You also stood with us in New England.
Yes, that's right.
And I want to recognize that.
Yeah. That's right.
You know, it seems to be, though, that I don't know if all of a sudden now labor's the darling of the conversation that's been going on. Right? You know, we've had Democratic candidates, we've had Republican candidates, and from time to time, everybody sort of wooed us.
Yeah.
And wooed these people in this room.
Right.
But things haven't changed too much. How do you plan on making change so that we can really tell that you would be serious?
That's right.
In your support of working people? Forget about the unions for a second. Just working people.
That's a fair point, and I thank you for recognizing my history on this. And for me, truly, it is about it's about justice. It's about understanding that working people and unions. I mean, I can't put unions aside, because when we are talking about working people and the dignity that should come with a hard day's work, it is our labor unions that have paid blood, sweat, and tears, literally, for all that any working person has received in terms of wages and benefits that represent a good and a hard day's work. I say this everywhere. Whether or not you are a member of a labor union, thank labor for the 5-day work week, the 8-hour workday, sick leave, weekends. And so I do combine the two, especially when we know, Mark, that across this country, that labor is under attack, that the right to organize, the right to strike is under attack. These right-to-work laws that are designed because of the outsized influence that corporations have had and continue to try to have with state houses and in Washington, D.C., where I've been now for the last 2 years. And so what it looks like for me is being president of the United States in a way that is about the work that I've done before, understanding the importance of the law to enforce workers' rights. And that means about everything from wage and hour theft, which I have personally prosecuted, to what we need to do to support workers when employers are taking advantage of their right to organize and strike, and making sure there is accountability and consequence for that. It is about using the power of the president to appoint a Secretary of Labor who comes from labor, and I pledge to you I will do that. It comes from understanding that when the president, one of the strongest and most powerful tools in the hands of the president of the United States is that microphone she holds. And with that, you hear me?
She.
And with that, yes. And with that, she has the power to make clear the importance of supporting working people around issues like pensions. What is the pension? Because I fought, as you know, during all those battles about making sure that pensions remained intact. You worked for those. It's about recognizing UFCW members. When you're working on that line, you do some of the most physically taxing work You can literally have your hand maimed. You work hard. And you should have a guarantee that you work in a safe place and that you get the pension that you have earned. Well, when the President of the United States uses that microphone to make clear that's an American value, which is a hard day's work, should come with all of the dignity of the value of that labor in terms of wages and benefits and workplace safety. It can have a profound influence on the way that we address these things. I'll tell you another thing I have done in my history, and I will do as president. Bring those corporations to the table, with workers at the table, to talk about workers' rights on everything from automation, which means that I will require that when we are talking about automation, there need to be public hearings, meaning you are at the table to talk about the impact on working people of automation. How many jobs will be lost? What is the plan for transitioning people? What is the 5-year or the 10-year plan for what that means for existing workers, much less future workers? The President of the United States has a profound amount of power to not only run a Department of Justice that prosecutes and goes after corporations that violate our labor laws, but also to be a president who stands up and says proudly that it is the working people of America, starting with members of labor unions, who have built the middle class. And if we want to be strong going into the future, we must protect your right to organize and right to strike. That's why I have always stood on the picket line. I have always stood on the picket line. I'm talking 15 years. So this is way before Donald Trump was elected, and I knew I needed to run. And so I will tell you, look at my history, but also I have a plan for going forward. And it involves everything from supporting workers around all that we need to do in terms of bargaining position and power, bringing corporations in, like I've done, even with the workers at McDonald's, called McDonald's. I brought in the big grocery stores when we were going through all of those mergers. And I will do that continuously. I know my power. I've had power, and I know how it can be used in a way that is about helping working people and people who often do not have much voice at that table unless we work as a collective and in solidarity.
Okay. Would you please turn your attention to the screen? Andrea Page, a member from Local 400, which is our Washington, D.C. local, wanted to ask a question.
Okay.
My name is Ms. Adrienne Page. I am a part-time worker with Giant Food Pharmacy as a pharmacist technician, and I've been with Giant now 19 years. What are we going to do about automation in terms of the times changing into automation? How are we going to equate that with training for the people so that they're not lost in the process? Because it's taking away a lot of jobs.
That's right. That's right. So again, we expect that up to 40% of the jobs that currently exist could be lost to automation. And I would like to think, but I'm smart enough and experienced enough to know better, that when corporations are looking at automation, they do not have workers as first in mind. They do not have as first in mind what this will mean in terms of your ability to get through the end of the month, much less to raise your children with all of the resources that we know they need. And so what I will require is that for any corporation or any entity that is doing business with the federal government, and that's the catch in terms of what we have in terms of the resources, in order for anything to proceed, there need to be public hearings to talk about the impact of automation on the workers. And I've done that before. I've done that before in California when, for example, at the ports, when they were talking about automating what was happening at our ports. I brought them in and required that they would talk about what they were going to do in terms of what that meant for the labor force. Because I understand what's happening here. And the reality is that we have to know, as we all do, that we cannot count on them to have workers' best interest. And so there needs to be another method of accountability, and that's going to need to be the president. The other piece of it is that part of my plan is that there is an $8,000 tax credit that will be available for any worker that needs to transition into a new sort of employment. And that transition, that $8,000, will be to develop the skills that are necessary to get whatever the job is that we have to transition into. And it will include covering whatever is necessary in terms of child care, transportation, and associated cost. Because we're going to have to deal with the realities of this in two ways. Again, both that is about understanding that, we say that we are going to deal with people, my trade policy, for example, I'm always going to conduct trade policy in a way that it is not about exporting American jobs, it's about exporting American products. But I also understand that we need to have some reinforcement and requirements, because corporations are not on the natural going to do the right thing necessarily by their workers.
Duh.
Yeah. Right, but policy needs to reflect that, and it doesn't always, right? Especially these people in Washington, D.C., that would have you think that these corporations, they're the ones who are going to build America and all this trickle-down nonsense. I could use different words, but I know we have the press here.
I'd like to call on Colleen Huber from Local 431 here in Iowa.
As a breast cancer survivor and 2 kids in college, keeping up with health care is a big priority for me and my family. And without a good union job, I would have never been able to do this. I can't imagine over the years what I would have gone through without my benefits. What would you say to union members who worry about losing health care benefits that they fight for, what we're going to fight for under the Medical Act?
Right, and I just want to first applaud you for being a strong survivor. So my plan for health care is as follows. I have a Medicare for All plan. And my Medicare for All plan will reduce cost. It will get rid of copays and deductibles. It will require that insurance companies play by our rules or they don't play. But I'm also going to leave you with choice. Meaning, I heard from so many people that say, Kamala, in your Medicare for All plan, don't take away my choice to have a private or a public plan. So the difference between my plan and some of the others is that I will not take that choice from you. You get to make that choice. So that's it in terms of Medicare for All. I will also say that part of the issue here is what we need to do to also recognize, and this is something that is not getting covered by the national press nearly enough, is women's access to health care. And what we need to do is a specific issue in that regard for everything from access to reproductive health care to breast cancer and all other and maternal mortality issues. And so that's a big part of my health care initiative as well. But, over half of American families today cannot afford and will actually go bankrupt because of a $500 medical bill. That's the reality. Talk about what's on the justice being on the ballot. In America today, 1 in 4 diabetes patients cannot afford their insulin. Here in Iowa, which has experienced, where a lot of states have the opioid epidemic, there is a syringe, Mark, that contains a drug that could save the life of someone who was OD'd on opioids. The contents of that syringe, $4,000. These pharmaceutical companies have been getting away with virtual murder. And I've taken them on. I took them on as Attorney General. I will take them on as President. Because the cost of health care in America is unconscionable. And health care and access to health care should be a right in America and not a privilege of just those who could afford it.
Senator, if you turn your attention to the screen, Jeremy Freet from 1059, which is Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
Okay?
I'll be there in a couple days.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Freet. I'm a member of Local 1059 in Columbus, Ohio. We need unions to protect the good middle-class jobs my parents and grandparents counted on. And I'm tired of companies that think they can get away with union busting.
Yeah.
What will you do to protect good jobs and make sure every worker can join a union?
Right. So I appreciate that in Ohio and across, all over the country we're seeing this. And so it's a number of things, and pardon me if I repeat what I said earlier, but it is about using the power of the president to ban those right-to-work laws. It is about ensuring that workers have the right to strike, ensuring that workers have the right to unionize, going after employers who interfere with workers' rights to unionize. It is about fighting for card check. It is about making sure that we deal with issues like requiring corporations to be accountable for what might be worker displacement or lost jobs around automation. And all of those initiatives are well within the power of the President of the United States if she chooses to use it. And I do fully understand why it is important to do that. It is important to do that because if we want to compete as a nation and be a strong country, then we need our unions to be strong. Because here's the bottom line for me on this, and it's just a matter of fairness. If we all agree that in any negotiation, right, where there are two sides, that whatever is being negotiated, that we all agree the outcome should be fair. Let's just start there. Do we agree when there's a negotiation, the outcome should be fair? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, now, if we're talking about requiring one worker to negotiate against a corporation, is the outcome going to be fair? No. That's why we have unions. To say, let the collective stand for the issues that are about the fairness of wages and benefits, so that when the collective bargains against the corporation, the outcome will be fair. That's all we're asking for, fairness. And I'm going to tell you, as President of the United States, I will make that point every day of the week. That if people want to talk about fighting for justice in America, which, by the way, labor unions, UFCW, and so many have fought for throughout our history, being the first on the line to march and shout and fight for justice. If we say we are a country that values fairness and justice, then value organized labor. It is that basic. It's that basic. It's that basic.
One final question, and then we need to go to your remarks.
Okay.
So, as a former prosecutor,
yes,
would you prosecute this case for impeachment?
So I intend to do it at the ballot box for sure. So here, you're so right to say this, Mark. So here's the thing. I've been calling for the impeachment of this president for a long time and the process to proceed, and based on everything I know, yes.
Is there enough evidence?
Based on everything I know, yes. Yes. And here's how I think about it. Because we've got a confession, and it don't take a prosecutor to see that was a confession. I mean, we have a confession, we have a cover-up, right? So then they tried to hide the thing in the other computer, right? And then there's a concept called consciousness of guilt, which is, you know, like we know when our kids like, oh, I didn't eat that thing, right? Because you know you did the thing you weren't supposed to do, right? And so in fact, when people say, well, how long do you think this impeachment process is going to be? Well, it shouldn't take very long because he did it out in the open, you know, and this is the thing. He told us who he is. You know, Maya Angelou had some great, great sayings. And one of them, she'd say, listen to people when they tell you who they are the first time. He told us who he is. Remember when he was campaigning? He said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, which is a very busy street in New York, and get away with it. He told us that. So in his mind, I could do anything, including in the wide open, and get away with it. Well, on this, he will not. Because you know what? Do gotta go. Do gotta go. You gotta go. And this is the impeachment process. And it literally is about saying, you know, and I know people have been saying, you know, there's press in the room, people come up to me and they'll say, well, you know, Kamala, when you're doing town halls and rallies, are people bringing it up? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, they're bringing it up in that people know that it's just not fair right now. People know that we got to abide by the law. We got to pay taxes. We're held accountable to abide by the law, but yet we got, you know, 400 of the richest families in America not paying taxes. Corporations, 60 of the biggest, not paying taxes. And we got a lawless president, right? So people know this. And this fight on the impeachment issue is about a fight, yes, for justice. It is a fight for fairness. It is a fight for our democracy. And again, labor and organized labor and UFCW, this has been your fight since the beginning of time, which is to fight, to say everybody should be treated equally. It's a fight to say we need justice, and justice means a number of things, including just because you got power doesn't mean you can get away with anything, even when you do it in plain sight. That's what's before us, and that's why I keep saying justice is on the ballot in 2020.
I'd like for you to have an opportunity to give a close.
Okay.
You know, and I do want to thank you for your candor. Look, I know that prosecutors can decide to prosecute cases or not. It's called prosecutorial authority. Mm-hmm. You know, and I was not a proponent of impeachment.
Uh-huh.
And the reason why I wasn't is I thought that no matter what happened, he'd say that it wasn't fair.
Yeah.
And I thought that the only way that we were going to get real change is if the people voted for change or not.
Right.
One way or the other, or not. You know, so it's interesting from a prosecutor's perspective about whether or not there's really anything there. So thank you for that.
And I think that, and maybe this will be part of my closing. You know, so my parents met when they were active in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. My sister and I joke, we grew up surrounded by a bunch of adults who spent full time marching and shouting for justice. And you know, I grew up as a woman of color in America, knowing that the criminal justice system was often not fair to everybody. That's why I decided to become a prosecutor. Because I said, you know, there is certainly a role on the outside to do what we need to do to change the system, but also why not go also on the inside where we can be at the table and make some decisions from that perspective. And so that's why I did it. That's why I did the work that I did of creating one of the first initiatives in the country for, you know, mostly young men who are arrested for drugs and getting them jobs and counseling. You know, and this was back in the dark ages in 2004. People would say to me, Kamala, why are you doing that? You're supposed to be locking people up, not letting them out. I said, well, this war on drugs is a failure. It's related to mass incarceration of whole populations of people for what is a public health issue that you criminalized. They would say all kinds of things, but in fact, labor and organized labor have always been my partners in all of these things that I've done that have been the first that nobody could actually envision, but could be achieved. And when I look at where we are now, as a former prosecutor, I look at it in terms of what is fair. And on this issue of impeachment, it is not fair or right that you, each person in this room, will be held accountable if you violate the law. And yet we have a lawless president. Lawless. The press have found he has at least 12,000 lies. Lawless. Using Twitter in a way that is about intimidating witnesses. Right? In a way that is about trying to suppress evidence. Nobody else would be able to get away with that. And so the way I think about it is, yes, Mark, you are right. Look, there is a legitimate argument to be made. The House of Representatives will do its thing, and then if it comes over to the Senate, which is where I am, and I've been there for 2.5 years, it is very likely that the head of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, will not do anything and let it go anywhere. But the point that I think about is this, and this is the point of our fight every day. Because what we know is we're not going to always win our battles. We know that. But we don't ever give up our fight. We don't give up our fight. That is not our nature. To sit back and say, okay, maybe this one we won't win, so therefore we're not going to get out of bed. No, we fight. And that's how I feel about this right now. That's how I feel about this fight, which is to say that we are a nation that was formed on noble ideals. The ideals that were present when we wrote the Constitution of the United States and all of its amendments and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, those words we spoke in 1776, that we are all equal and should be treated that way. And so this here in front of us is a fight for those ideals, many of which we know we've not reached. We haven't reached full equality under the law. We haven't achieved fairness under the law. But the nature of who we are is we never give up because we know what can be unburdened by what has been. We know and can imagine a system of justice and an America where every working family gets able to get through the end of the month and pay their bills and have food on the table. We know an America and believe in an America where all workers have rights. And we fight for that even when we don't see it every day, but that's how we've achieved what we have achieved, because we know what's possible and we fight to get there. And so that's what I see being on the table in 2020. And I know what is possible. I have seen what is possible. And I have seen the kind of fight that UFCW engages in every day that makes a difference in the lives of people who are not in this room but are forever benefited because of your work. Thank you. Thank you.
Look at that.
Oh, thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, brothers and sisters. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hang on one second.
Okay.
Adam only wants me to ask you one more question.
Okay.
You know.
What are you up to?
Well, I think that, you know, you've gone through quite a few things that were fairly negative, right? Mm-hmm. If there is one thing that you think President Trump has done right, what would that be?
I rarely am. I'm at a loss for it. Because here's the thing. He sold people out. He has sold people out. He sold out working people. I mean, I can't find that thing. And because he came in office saying, he said, I got you working people. I got you. Everyone from farmers to auto workers to UFCW workers. I got you. I see you. I got your back. And then he passed a tax bill benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations. Passed trade policy that is causing those auto workers, our brothers and sisters in the UAW, to be on strike making $250 a week right now while they're on strike. Lordstown plant closed down. You know what's happening without all these mergers of everything from grocery stores to hospitals. Sold working people out. Sold out our values with policies that have been about putting babies in cages and separating children from their parents at the border in the name of border security, when in fact it's a human rights abuse being committed by the United States government. And it sold out. And then sold out our national security. Because here's the thing. The commander-in-chief of the United States of America should always have, yes, at her first priority, keeping our nation and homeland secure. But what do you do? On the issue of the fact of Russia's interference in the election of the President of the United States, prefers to take the word of the Russian president over the word of the American intelligence community. On the subject of an American student who was tortured and later died, prefers to take the word of a North Korean dictator over the word of the American intelligence community. On the subject of a journalist who was assassinated, a journalist who had American credentials, prefers to take the word of a Saudi prince over the word of the American intelligence community. We need a new commander-in-chief, and we need a new president, because dude gotta go. And I hope to earn your support. I appreciate you.
Senator, thank you so much.
I appreciate you. All right, you take care. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Wow. There are some really, really interesting candidates this year. Really interesting candidates. Well, Senator Sanders, how you doing?
I am great. How are you?
Well, our next candidate, as you can see, is Bernie Sanders. You know, throughout Senator Sanders' career, he's been a legislator and a fierce advocate for labor and all working men and women. And I would also say that we ought to deem you today labor's lion. Because quite honestly, from health care reform to raising wages, you've pushed policies that improve lives, and you've literally changed policy debates that we have around major issues like health care. And as a presidential candidate, you've proven no matter what may come, you'll never shrink from a righteous fight. Here you are after you've had a cardiac event, and you still wanted to be here with us, and I thank you for doing this. I know that you're under doctor's orders to stay at home, but welcome via Skype, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And let me thank the 1.3 billion members of the UFCW for everything that you do. I don't have to tell anybody that at a time of massive income, wealth inequality, and unprecedented corporate greed, your union, decade after decade, as a leader in the struggle for economic justice and the rights of all of our people to live with dignity and security. And I thank you very much for all that you have done and will be doing in the future. When Stop and Shop tried to substantially cut back on the health care benefits of 31,000 workers, the UFCW stood up, put back, went on strike. You wanted victory. When Ralph's and Albertsons and Bonds and Billions tried to force the UFCW to make major concessions that would have caused serious economic pain to your workers, you stood up, you fought back, and you won another major victory to raise wages and increase health care and retirement benefits. At a time when large multinational corporations all over this country are reneging on the pension benefits they promised to workers and forcing workers to pay more for health insurance, you demonstrated to workers all over America that when they stand together and are prepared to fight back, there is nothing that they cannot accomplish. I thank you for being an example for working people all over America. And brothers and sisters, let me tell you what I know that you already know. And that is the American people are increasingly outraged with the corporate greed that they are experiencing every single day. They are sick and tired of large, profitable corporations shutting down in the United States, throwing millions of workers out on the streets and then moving to low-wage countries like Mexico, China, and other countries all over the world. They are sick and tired of corporations like Amazon, owned by the wealthiest person in this country, who makes a company that makes billions in profits, a company that is anti-union, a company that treats its workers with contempt, and that is attempting to replace thousands of American workers with robots, all the while this major company making over $10 billion in profits. You guys know how much they paid in federal income taxes last year? Not one nickel. And the American people are sick and tired of the kind of exploitation and massive levels of income and wealth inequality that we are seeing. And they know, I know, and you know, that if we're going to grow the middle class of this country, we have got to rebuild, strengthen, and expand the trade union movement in America. The labor movement is the last fight against a billionaire class, a corrupt elite that will not be satisfied until they have it all. And that's why we have a 100% lifetime pro-union voting record for the AFL-CIO. But I am proud to have introduced the strongest pro-union platform of any presidential candidate in the history of the United States of America. Let me tell you why we are doing this and what I hope to accomplish. At the end of the day, the only way that we bring about the changes that we need to improve the lives of working people is when we have an unprecedented grassroots movement, and at the center of that movement has got to be the labor movement of the United States of America. And that is why, when I am president, we will set a goal as a nation to double union membership in the United States in my first term of office. Double union membership. Now, here's how we do it. This is very briefly what our legislation does. It says that when a majority of workers in a bargaining unit sign a card to join a union, they will have a union, period. End of discussion. Sign a card, majority support it, not union. Under my proposal, we will end right-to-work laws in 27 states by repealing Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act. Under my proposal, we will prevent companies from cutting the retirement benefits of more than 1.5 million union workers and retirees in multi-employer pension plans.
Yeah. That's right. That's good.
When a promise is made to a worker who gives up wage benefits, gives up health benefits, in order to protect that pension, you know what? That promise has got to be kept. That pension, 100% of it, has got to be delivered. Under our proposal, we will create a sectoral collective bargaining system to set minimum standard for wages, benefits, and work schedules across industries, just like they do in many European countries. Furthermore, the Sanders administration will fundamentally overhaul our broken immigration system and provide a path toward citizenship for 11 million undocumented Americans. We will end wage theft, discrimination, harassment, abuse, and mass migration rates. And let us be clear, bringing undocumented workers out of the shadows and giving them the basic workplace and labor protection all workers are entitled helps every American worker in our country. The bottom line is that together we must create an economy and a government that works for every man, woman, and child in this country, not just the 1% and wealthy campaign contributors. Thank you all very much.
Senator Sanders, before I ask the first question, if you could, please keep your answers to 2 minutes so that we can ask more member questions. The first question I'd received online had to do with automation. We had a conversation a little bit earlier. There are fairly significant and troubling numbers that have been projected about the impact of automation and AI on unemployment. And the question really is this. Would you consider, if you were the President of the United States, to shorten the work week to 32 hours at the same rate of pay that everybody makes 40?
The answer is I would consider that and many other proposals, Mark, and I'll tell you why. If we take a step back and we look at the broad issue of AI and we look at automation and we look at robotics, what our goal must be is to make sure that technology works for working people and not just for the corporations that own and utilize that technology. So in other words, if we are producing robotics or AI or automation of all kinds that increases worker productivity and profits for the corporations, they cannot be the sole beneficiaries of those gains. So the bottom line for me as president is to make sure that modern technology works for working people. Shortening the work week is certainly one idea that we have got to look at. There are a number of other ideas. But we're not Luddites. What we want to do is utilize that technology to improve life, raise wages, improve the standard of living of working people, and not simply benefit the large corporations who will benefit from it.
Thank you, Senator. And we really do appreciate that response. Now we'll hear from an audience member, Christine Garlick from Local 431 here in Iowa.
Hello. For more than 20 years, my husband and I have had good jobs at helping us provide for our kids. Our family is doing okay, but I know there are millions of workers in this economy who have little savings and live paycheck to paycheck. How would you address this as a president?
Well, thank you very much, Christine. And I think you have addressed the major economic crisis in America. The truth is that half of our people, unbelievably, in the richest country in the history of the world, half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. That's something I know a little bit about because I grew up in a family that lived paycheck to paycheck. So let me tell you, Christine, a little bit of what I would do to address that crisis. First of all, we would do what every other major country on earth now does, and that is guarantee health care to all people as a human right and not a privilege. And that means people no longer will have to worry whether or not they can afford to go to the doctor or whether they're going to go bankrupt, as 500,000 people in this country do as a result of medical bills. Second of all, it is my deeply held belief that in America, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. And that is why I have helped lead the fight in this country and have introduced the key legislation to raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. Thirdly, as I mentioned a moment ago, I believe the middle class does not grow unless we have a strong labor movement. And that is why I've introduced the most pro-worker labor reform legislation in the modern history of this country. Furthermore, I happen to believe that we have got to make sure that education in America is a human right. And that means that all people, regardless of the income of their families, should be able to get a higher education if they want, or get the trade skills that they need to do the various work that is desperately needed in this country. And that's why I've led the effort to make public colleges and universities tuition free and to cancel all student debt in America. Now, when I say these things, there are some people who say, well, Bernie, these are great ideas. How are you going to pay for them? And I will tell you exactly how we're going to pay for them. When 3 people in America own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, when major corporation after major corporation doesn't pay a nickel in federal income taxes, under a Bernie Sanders administration, we will make sure that the rich and the powerful start paying their fair share of taxes.
Senator Sanders, that answer to that question sort of raises another issue. You know, if Donald Trump was here today, he would say that your education program, your health care program, raising minimum wage, taxing the top 1%, at least the wealth owners here in this country, is a socialist idea. If he were here, what would you say back to him?
Well, what I would say is to kind of paraphrase what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, and that is, we live in a society which has, in fact, socialism for the very rich and rugged individualism for working families and the poor. So we live in a society in which Donald Trump himself received millions and millions of dollars in subsidies and tax breaks from the federal government, where the fossil fuel industry receives billions and billions of dollars in tax breaks and subsidies. But under Donald Trump, what he is doing is trying to throw tens of millions of Americans off of the health insurance they have, giving massive tax breaks to the rich and to the powerful, and despite his campaign promises, is trying to cut back on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So socialism means the role that the federal government must play. Trump and I have a slight disagreement. He wants the federal government to play a role which makes the very rich even richer. I want to make sure that the federal government protects the needs of working families in terms of health care, in terms of housing, in terms of education, in terms of environment, in terms of decent wages. That's the difference that Trump and I have on that issue.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth. Are you calling him a socialist too?
In a certain sense, I am. What he believes in is corporate socialism. When you create a situation where major corporations owned by incredibly wealthy people pay nothing in federal income tax, when you create a situation where industries receive billions and billions of dollars in subsidies, while at the same time, 500,000 people tonight are sleeping out on the streets, and half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, yeah, I would say that Trump is a strong advocate of corporate socialism. And my view is that we have got to do a democratic socialism, which makes government work for the working families of this country, not just the elite.
Thank you so much. Senator, I'd like to invite you to give your final remarks, and I want to commend you on your courage and your stamina for being here with us today.
Well, thank you so much. Honor, and I truly wish I could have been with you. Look, here is the story. We live in an unprecedented moment in American history. And by that I mean not only that we have the most dangerous president in the history of this country, somebody who is a pathological liar, a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, and a religious bigot, but we have a nation today in which we have more income and wealth inequality than since the 1920s, where we have a corrupt political system in which billionaires are able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to buy elections, undermining the whole thrust of what American democracy is supposed to be about. We are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right. We face the existential threat of climate change and the fact that we will see more floods and heat waves and extreme weather disturbances if we do not act boldly. That's where we are as a nation. And that is why I have advocated and believe that we need bold solutions in order to take on the greed and corruption of the corporate elite, who are doing phenomenally well, while the middle class continues to shrink and so many people are living in desperation. And my view is, and I know it's an unusual view, but this is what I believe, that if you look at the history of our country, you look at the history of the labor movement, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the gay movement, the environmental movement, what you learn is that the only way real change ever takes place in the fight for justice, and that's economic justice and social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, the only way change ever takes place is when millions of people stand together and demand it. And what I have said is that as President of the United States, obviously I become Commander-in-Chief. But I would also, working with the labor unions of this country, help become Organizer-in-Chief, bringing our people together to take on the greed and corruption. Work to take on greed and corruption of corporate elite, and telling them that our great nation and our government belong to all of us and not just to the few. So let me conclude by thanking all of you for the great and important work you are doing. Let's go forward together. Let's expand the trade union movement in America. Let's rebuild the middle class of this country and create an economy and a government that works for all of us. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator. You know, as we close today's events, I want to thank Vice President Joe Biden, Senators Harris, Bennet, and Sanders, Mayor Buttigieg, and Governor Bullock for taking the time to speak to UFCW members all across our country. You know, as we've heard these candidates, they all have unique visions and ideas. There's no doubt that they are sincere in their commitment to the future of this country. And whether you or any UFCW member choose to vote for them or not, you should know that the UFCW is committed to providing all of our members the opportunity to hear from all those people that are running for president, to hear how those candidates are going to address the challenges that you care about, honestly, and how they'll confront the issues that matter to you and millions of other hardworking men and women in this country. And that's why we held these two forums. That's why we invited these Democratic candidates here. And why, and this may surprise you, that we're even open to having President Trump coming before our members answering the same type of questions, the tough ones, about the issues that our members care about, as well as to explain his policies, his procedures, and his record. Now, while he's clearly preoccupied with a few other current events, it is the position of this union that everyone who seeks the highest office should answer to the American people, irrespective of whether or not that member or voter is Republican, Democrat, or independent, because as I've said before, our elected leaders are here to serve us. And we should never, ever forget that. It should never be the other way around. Thank you for being here. I want to thank the UFCW staff and all the members who helped put together these great events. But most importantly, thank you for being members of this wonderful union family. And please remember, no matter which candidate or party you may choose to vote for, make your choice an informed one. And embrace all the power that we have to define the destiny of this nation through our vote. Thank you again, and don't forget to vote. Y'all be safe going home. Thank you, everybody.